And this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Progress 127. We have a few guests tonight. We're going to talk about various things that are going on right now in the country and in the world. As always, let me remind you that there are two places you can check to keep up with things during the week. One is if you have any comments about something you hear tonight, you want to get in touch with anybody, get more information, and you want to contact me, go to my website. It's Fader Files, FEDERFILES.com, FEDERFILES.com. Find out what else I do on the radio, books I've written, various things, and join my mailing list. Also, I run a political blog, host a political blog, and I post things on there, and there are debates on there all the time. You can post whatever you want on it. It's called Occupied Territory, and it's on Facebook. As silly as Facebook is, I know, it's disgusting and ridiculous, but still, if you want to, venture over there, you can do that. It's Occupied Territory on Facebook. We have a lot of people with a lot of give and take. It's pretty interesting. All right. Many of you may know that, obviously you all know about Citizens United, but of course there's now a son of Citizens United. Maybe you might want to call it, there's all kinds of names you can give it, last nail in the coffin for democracy, whatever you want. But and I know people are tired of these constant, relentless assaults on the democratic system by the court, by Congress. And now we have a case before the Supreme Court, which could probably be the very end of any kind of control whatsoever on money in politics. And it is a case that we're going to discuss with Mr. David Early, who is from the Brennan Center for Justice. Hi.
Hi.
Mr. Early serves as a counsel in a democracy program at the Brennan Center for Justice, and he focuses on money in politics and fair courts. And he, in this role, he works on election law cases in courts across the country, including before the U.S. Supreme Court, where the current case we're going to talk about tonight is right now. They had oral arguments started last week. Mr. Early also submits public comments to state and federal government officials on election law matters and publishes reports on current issues in money and politics. So this case is McCutcheon versus the FEC. Can you give us a little background on it and what the details are before we talk more about it?
Sure. McCutcheon versus FEC.
We can hardly hear you. On a speakerphone or a cell phone or something?
I'm on a cell phone. Should I speak up?
I guess so. Are you traveling somewhere?
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. Because the signal is really bad. Is there any other phone or?
I don't think I have one available. No, sorry.
So this is just a regular cell phone. All right. So if you could just speak up, I guess we'll give it a shot.
Okay. McCutcheon versus FEC was argued before the U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday of this week, and the case involves a challenge to the federal aggregate contribution limits, which is the amount that one individual can give to all candidates, parties, and PACs during a 2-year election cycle. So this is the amount that you can give to everyone total, as opposed to, say, the amount you can give to one candidate over one cycle.
So this includes committees, candidates, everything, right?
Candidates and their committees, party committees, and then outside committees like PACs.
Okay.
That could potentially give money to candidates or parties also.
So this is the election cycle. So it's every 2 years for a federal election cycle?
The limits for candidates are for every 2 years. The limits for other entities are every year, but if you combine them, it ends up with a 2-year cycle number.
Okay, and the current cap is, let's see, 123,200, right?
There's technically two separate caps.
Okay.
There's a cap of 48,600 for candidates, and then 74,600 for all other committees.
Okay. So, and I guess who is this? Mr. McCutcheon, he is challenging this, right?
Mr. McCutcheon is an Alabama businessman, and he, along with the Republican National Committee, are challenging this law under the First Amendment, basically saying that it violates their First Amendment rights to free speech.
And on what do they base? What is their argument? What do they base this on?
Well, the general basis is that that giving money is a speech act, and therefore it is an infringement of free speech that is protected by the First Amendment. And as a matter of law, the Supreme Court in 1976 in Buckley versus Valeo, which is still the seminal case in campaign finance, held that giving money to a candidate is an expressive act of some kind. But the court said that the amount you give is only a slight indicator of the intensity of that desire, and that, say, I personally don't have millions of dollars, so I can't give $100,000 away. I don't have that. But Mr. McCutcheon can, because he has that. But that doesn't mean that he feels more strongly than I do about a candidate. It just means he has more money and is able to do that.
Well, what about the obvious? Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So they're saying under the current limits, he can contribute the maximum amount to an individual candidate of around $5,200 per cycle to, I think, 8 candidates. But when he reaches the 9th candidate, he goes over the limit. And his claim is that violates the First Amendment. On the other side of the scales, weighing against that is you have the fear of corruption and the appearance of corruption that can stem from having these substantial sums of money running around in our democracy. And so the argument is that because money of this magnitude has the potential to disrupt our democratic processes because officials will respond to their donors as opposed to their constituents, limitations on the amount of money in politics can be justified, even though the First Amendment guarantees political free speech. So
if there were no Citizens United, this is almost like a bough of a tree that Citizens United is, right? I mean, this grows out of Citizens United, doesn't it?
Well, kind of, but not really. Going back to Buckley, they laid down a major distinction between contributions and expenditures. Contributions being money you give to someone for a political purpose, and then expenditures being money that's spent for a political purpose.
Oh, well, I don't understand it. I don't understand the difference.
So if I give money to a candidate, say $100, that's a contribution. If that candidate then spends that money on a political ad or a flyer or something, that's an expenditure. And those are of a different constitutional magnitude under the current campaign finance law as construed by the U.S. Supreme Court. And so in Citizens United, the Supreme Court said that independent expenditures of non-human entities such as corporations, unions, PACs, and so on cannot be limited or banned under the First Amendment. The rationale being that these substantial sums of money, even because they're independent of candidates, there is no potential for corruption since they're doing it off, supposedly in some separate area of our democracy and are not directly interacting with the candidate. And the language they use is that there's no quid pro quo possibility there, in that you can't give the money and then get something back.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
That's of course highly questionable.
Yeah.
In that certainly a candidate's going to take notice if someone spends tens of millions of dollars supporting their candidacy, which happened last cycle. But maybe even show up for a fundraiser for these organizations. They're going to spend these tens of millions of dollars. Though that's supposedly not coordinated under our current law. But there you go. That's where we're at. This case here, that's Citizens United.
Okay.
This case here deals with contributions, which is a little bit separate.
So, but you would think that there would be a stricter limit or more of a harsh eye cast on a contribution directly to a candidate. I mean, one of the things that I keep mentioning Citizens United because there's certain philosophical things that seem to be tangential or even connected here. For instance, Kennedy, was it Justice Kennedy who wrote the majority opinion in Citizens United?
Kennedy authored Citizens United, yes. Okay,
so he was, there are words that they use in there, things like, they throw words around like gratitude or indebtedness is not the same as corruption. You know what I mean? Things like that. There are certain there's a certain massive moral vagueness here that the whole thing seems to be on rollers or skids. It doesn't really stand firmly on a moral base. This is my opinion, obviously, but if somebody gives money directly to a bunch of candidates, clearly that is a quid pro quo, right? I mean, you would have to prove it after the fact. I have one example here of the famous example. Maybe you're aware of it. I guess you're aware of it, about Ray Kroc, the head of McDonald's, and the Nixon creep, the committee to reelect the president.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, so maybe you could explain that a little bit, because that's a classic example of a quid pro quo that actually happened before. People thought it was going to happen before the event, and it happened after the event.
Well, the rough details are that Ray Kroc, who was the founder of McDonald's, wanted to increase the price of, I think it was the Quarter Pounder.
Yep.
And there were price controls in place at the time, and so he couldn't raise it without permission. And so he basically routed a bunch of money through a bunch of political committees that ended up, I think, in Nixon's campaign committee. Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold, the price of a Quarter Pounder can go up. They changed their mind and they said it could go up afterwards. I mean, that's a classic example of quid pro quo type of arrangements. Mm-hmm. And I guess I should go back. You know, again, Buckley laid all this down originally, in that the court said, you know, a system of government that has unlimited contributions has inherent potential for corruption. I mean, mm-hmm. It's obvious. There doesn't have to be an obvious, I'll give you $1,000 and then you'll, you know, sign off on this regulation that I need or don't need mm-hmm. For my business. The court's already recognized that it's inherent, but we've kind of moved away from that in more recent years, and the court seems to want to look at almost outright bribery. But the court said in the 70s, you don't need direct bribery. There's other things that can represent corruption.
Mm-hmm. This phrase here that Kennedy used, I'm sorry, I keep referring to this case because to me there are some, you know, some philosophical, moral connections. Kennedy used a phrase here, and I guess it's a legal phrase, compelling governmental interest. Right. Can you explain what that is? In other words, is there a compelling governmental interest? And by governmental, I assume the governmental interest means the interest of democracy, the people in a democracy for a fair election. Is there a compelling governmental interest, do you think, in not allowing people to contribute untold millions directly to candidates and committees for candidates?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what he's talking about there is the standard of review for the law. And that was a major distinction in Buckley as well, in that contributions are subject to a lower level of scrutiny in that constitutional scrutiny, meaning that you need perhaps a lesser justification to have a law upheld that potentially infringes on the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. However, on the expenditure side, which is where you're on with Citizens United, that's subject to strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of scrutiny, and therefore you need an even greater justification for upholding a law against a constitutional challenge. I mean, the First Amendment is not absolute. Mm-hmm. You know, it says Congress shall make no law, but that doesn't mean I'm free to yell fire in a crowded theater or make libelous remarks or what have you.
Right.
There are justifications.
So they had. Are all arguments over now, or they started them last week and they're going to continue them, or what?
All the papers have been filed and all the arguments were completed on Tuesday. However, theoretically, the court could ask for further briefing and further arguments if it wanted to. That's mm-hmm. what occurred in Citizens United. If there's some issue they want to look at that they didn't get to this round. That being said, I think that's highly unlikely, and nothing that was said during oral arguments suggests that will occur.
The Brennan Center submitted an amicus brief, right?
That's correct, yes.
And so what were your points of argument there?
The main point of our argument was looking at what the founders did around the time of the Constitution, the founding of the country and whatnot. And we said that the founders were absolutely obsessed with defeating corruption of the government in all its forms. Mm-hmm. It viewed being a legislator or a government official as a sort of public trust where you have the fiduciary duty to uphold the public good and what your constituents want. Mm-hmm. And they guarded against this in all kinds of ways. There's the nobility clause, which forbids legislators from taking foreign titles of nobility without permission from the Congress. They had the federal government pays out the salaries of federal legislatures so that the legislators aren't, tied to their local governments for their funding, so they're free to represent their constituents. And again, here they were even concerned about money as well, in that I think it was Hamilton, I'm not sure who mm-hmm. exactly, said that he who pays is the master of he who is paid. I mean, and it wasn't direct. They wasn't talking directly about the First Amendment, but that's the general idea of how to think about this sort of thing. And so in our brief, we go through this, and the Constitutional Convention and the Federalist Papers, which were the anonymous papers written by three of the founding fathers discussing the Constitution and how important it is, and so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we say, look, the founders were very concerned about the government getting away from the people as a whole, and that's precisely what's happening here. And so you should be wary of having a very narrow definition of corruption, lest the founders' fears be realized.
So some of these justices are, as in any Supreme Court, some justices are strict constructionists and some aren't, right?
Some would be framed as, say, more textualist or originalist, while others might be more open to what's been referred to as a living constitution, which is that the Constitution evolves over time.
Well, I guess you would want to think about it one way or the other, depending on what the argument was. But that's another story. Let's get into the philosophy of how you argue before the Supreme Court or what you're arguing about. But in this case, as far as I'm concerned, your argument is completely right. And that's what the founders originally decided. And it seems like if you test it in your own mind, or you test it as an example of a way to govern, it's obviously the best way to do it. And you have to keep it clean. But who on this court, I mean, or unless you don't feel like commenting on that, I mean, who on this court are people that would be considered strict originalists or strict constructionists?
Justices Thomas and Scalia are definitely the two I would point to as the more originalist and textualist justices, and then others have it to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, you have to look at the language of the Constitution. It's not, you can't just legislate from the bench, but those are the two I would point to as the strongest textualists.
So arguments like the one you made should go straight home to them, right?
Well, theoretically, but that's the oral argument made clear that that's not going to happen this time around, at least for those two.
Now, during the course of these oral arguments, the justices, a lot of people, this is sort of like playing the stock market, depending on what somebody said or they thought somebody heard they said. The justices make comments all the time and ask questions, and then everybody plays like this is what it means, or weather forecasting, right? In other words, so if the justices make certain comments, you'll get people like even the New York Times reporter or somebody else, or all these, like SCOTUS, all these websites. They'll say, since they said this or asked these questions in a preponderant, sort of relentless way, this shows you how they're going to decide. But so we had a bunch of questions from people like Kennedy and Scalia, and what it seems they had. Let me. Is it all right if I just quote one really short quote? Would that be all right with you?
Sure.
Okay. So Scalia apparently said, and this is taken out of some context, so I can't exactly say what, but on Tuesday he said, this is Scalia, he says, "It seems to me fanciful to think that the sense of gratitude that an individual senator or congressman is going to feel because of a substantial contribution to the Republican National Committee or Democratic National Committee is any greater than the sense of gratitude that senator or congressman will feel to a PAC which is spending enormous amount of money in his district or his state for his election." And one other one here is, it was Kennedy who said, apparently at the arguments, he says, you have one or two persons. One person gives an amount to a candidate that's limited. The other takes out ads, uncoordinated, just all on his own, costing $500,000. Oh, this is, I'm sorry, this is the, in McCutcheon, yeah, $500,000. Don't you think, I guess he's asking the FEC, don't you think that the second person has more access to the candidate when the candidate is successful than the first? In other words, the second person who spent more money. And then summing up, it says here, the lawyer for McCutcheon, the guy who wants to, get rid of the limits, said this, concluded oral arguments by saying this: there's certainly going to be just as much gratitude to the individual who spends $3.6 million directly supporting one candidate through ads on that candidate's behalf. It seems to me that all these comments in that argument are arguing in favor of a good reason not to approve this, right? This lifting of limits.
Well, it's kind of funny because their remarks basically say we tore open this big hole in campaign finance in Citizens United.
Yeah.
And given that we've done that and this is available, this supposedly lesser means of gaining influence with officials is therefore important, and therefore we can strike down the law. But then, of course, it's like, well, you look at what you've done. Maybe we should go the other way. Mm-hmm. Justice Kagan, toward the end of the argument, said, if the court is reconsidering its jurisprudence, on independent expenditures, maybe we could revisit that, which was met with laughter in the courtroom, since that's a very great point of contention.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of sad on some level, too.
Well, it seems to me that that the basic argument here, as far as I can tell, is since this is since this would be just as bad as the other one, so let's do it anyhow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Since we already ruined it, what's the difference? Let's do this one too.
That's the gist of what they're thinking. Fortunately, the deciders, Justice Roberts, didn't really comment on that particular area during the argument. But he's the most important vote in the case, and it's hard to know exactly where he's going to go.
Oh, really? That's interesting. So, all right. So when do these things? Like, what is it? We're looking at the spring or summer when these decisions come down.
Well, this one was argued very, very early in the term on the second day. So you'll likely get it before the end of the term, which is the end of June. Mm-hmm. But it's completely up to the courts when they want to have the decision come down. If they, reach a consensus quickly and they write the opinion and there aren't a bunch of debates, it could come down in only a few months. On the other hand, if it's very contentious or if you have judges changing sides, it could go down to the very end. It's completely up to them, and they're not bound by any particular schedule. Now,
if these limits are lifted, which would be extraordinary in terms of democracy, or what would remain of it if they were lifted, it would have to be a law, or laws would have to be changed. Or if they just decide this, then that's the end of that law. How does that work exactly?
The law is still technically on the books, but it's not enforced anymore. No one's going to stop them from, I guess, I don't want to say violating it, because if the Supreme Court says it's not a violation, then it's not a violation. Mm-hmm. But so what you'd have left would be the individual contribution limits, such that you can give $5,200 to every single candidate in the entire country. And if you did that for one side, one party, that'd be around $2.4 million that you could give directly to federal candidates.
And they could actually combine those or rearrange them in any way they wanted, right?
Well, sort of. Candidates can give from their own campaign committees up to $2,000 per cycle to other candidates.
Oh, I see.
So it's not limitless, but they can certainly shuffle it around and give it to the candidates that need it the most.
Well, once let's say this cap was lifted, then the next case would be let's lift absolutely everything. In other words, there's no limit on what anybody can give to any candidate. I mean, isn't this the way this whole thing is going?
If the court strikes down this law, that's the next case that would be brought, and that would basically be the end of campaign finance if that one went badly. Mm-hmm. That being said, even if the court comes down against the law on this one, which is far from clear, I really don't think the court would go so far as to say everyone can give unlimited amounts. I just don't think the court would do that.
Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, this clearly favors somebody who has a whole lot of money, which a small percentage of Americans do, right?
I mean, that's right. I mean, if you struck down the law here, an individual could give $3.6 million to a party's candidates, party committees, and party state committees. That's 70 times the annual average family income in the United States. So one person would literally have to work a lifetime to give the same amount that one of these people could give in a single cycle.
It's really quite something. I know that Mr. Adelson, everybody's favorite casino operator, he gave, I think it was $100 million to various PACs in this last election. $100 million.
It's various reports have given different numbers, but he gave tens of millions of dollars to various independent groups over the course of the last cycle.
So theoretically speaking, if this came down the way that you and I wouldn't like it to come down, it would have an effect on the very next election cycle, which is to say the by-elections, as the British call them, the midterm elections, right?
It would be effective immediately. So you could give as much as you want under the underlying individual limits as soon as the court's decision was rendered. Well,
it's always fascinating, of course, that there is one particular place, the Republican National Committee, that's more interested in it than the Democratic National Committee, but that's another political discussion. David Early from the Brennan Center for Justice. If people want to find out more about the details of this and how the thing is proceeding, is there a place where they can go on the Brennan Center website to find out more?
Yeah, we have a case page set up for McCutcheon versus FEC where you can read our brief along with the other briefs and a brief summary of the case. And we have new content every day, not only on money and politics, but on voting and mass incarceration and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And you can just go to the front page at brennancenter.org, and you can see our new posts and our new reports and all sorts of things we're up to.
Okay, yeah, it's this is a place everybody should visit all the time. It's Brennan, Brennan, after the best Supreme Court justice perhaps there ever was, Justice Brennan. Brennan Center for Justice. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. David Early. And so here it is, boys and girls. It's Son of Citizens United. Really, it's just a kind of a big joke. It's like everybody's sort of winking and, laughing behind their hands. What is new that the Republican National Committee would bring this? It's only because they have that much more money, or the contributors to the Republican National Committee or large donors have that much more money than the large donors to the Democratic National Committee. Democrats also beholden to Wall Street and to rich people, obviously, don't pursue corporations, don't raise taxes on the rich very much. But still, if you're going to look at the whole big picture, there's more richer people and more corporate money going towards the Republicans than there always has been. So, naturally, they're the ones who are appealing this to the Supreme Court. They don't want anybody to limit any amount of money, really, in the end, to the Supreme Court. So, this kind of a decision to lift this limit, which is already kind of a joke, you know what I mean? How many of us have $5,200 per candidate, right? Clearly, the whole thing is tilted after Citizens United, and then even right now, $123,000 right now is the limit. Right now, every 2 years, you can only give $123,000 to the Republican Party committee, the National Committee, or to various Republican candidates. That's still completely undemocratic, obviously. So that's what we have here. Anybody wants to call on this, feel free. It's 866-997-4748. You begin to wonder after a while, does it make any difference? I mean, you've got these 5 Supreme Court justices. You've got the entire corrupt Congress of the United States. You've got the president. All of these people owe their jobs, their continuing jobs, their power, their money, their perks. The average member of Congress has assets of over $11 million. The president is a multimillionaire many times over. There is no president who hasn't been a multimillionaire in I don't know how long. Maybe the last one was Truman, who wasn't, right? Or Eisenhower. So clearly, it's a government of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich. This would just make it 10 times worse. I don't even, I guess it just keeps going and going and going. I don't know how that works. So if anybody wants to call, it's 866. Do we have any calls here?
Yes, we do.
Who do we have?
We have Joe.
Joe
is from Ohio.
Okay, Joe from Ohio. And if you want to join Joe, let's have a conversation about this. We're going to go under the assumption here while we do this show, as long as I do this show, that we still live in something resembling a democracy. So at least we can have fun talking about it, no matter what the reality of things is. Go ahead, Joe, you're on.
Yeah, I don't know how old you are, Mike.
68.
You remember
68.
Yeah, you remember Eugene McCarthy, don't you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, Eugene McCarthy was ran for president in '68.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the hippie choice.
Well, hippie, I don't know about that. I mean, he was a choice of a lot of intelligent, decent, democratically minded people. If that's what you...
The young kid choice. He was the choice of youngsters. College age.
Well, that was one of a group of people. That was one of the group of voters that definitely favored him. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was financed. He ran a small campaign because he didn't have a lot of money, but most of his financing came from the president of 3M Corporation up in Minnesota.
Right.
Okay.
Which is why I say the Democrats and the Republicans are really mostly in the same bag as far as taking money from the rich.
But what you're doing here, as long as you limit this money, you are limited. Another Eugene McCarthy will never be able to run the United States again, because under the present laws, because he cannot find enough people to bankroll him on that.
I'm losing you here. Like the last several candidates for president had several $100 million, which came from all different kinds of sources. So you'll have to be more. I really don't understand your argument.
Yeah, Eugene McCarthy was outside the mainstream of the Democratic Party at the time.
Yeah, right.
Eugene McCarthy wanted to end the Vietnam War. That was not. He was definitely against Johnson
Mm-hmm.
and against Humphrey.
Right.
I mean, the Democratic Party would not support Eugene McCarthy with money. Okay, the only financial money that he got was from a couple of guys in Minnesota.
Well, I'm sure he got plenty of small contributions from people who were against the war. I mean, I know I gave him money.
If you looked at the majority of his contributions
Uh-huh.
from just a handful of people in Minnesota.
Uh-huh.
So, and what you're doing right
now. What's the? Yeah, go ahead.
By restricting the amount of money that somebody can give to an individual candidate,
Which is what the law is right now.
which is what the law is right now.
Right.
Basically, you're just telling, you are just codifying both political parties as is. Okay, because nobody, Eugene McCarthy, a maverick, a guy who bucks his party,
Mm-hmm.
will never get the financial.
Oh, right, sure, of course, right. That's exactly what's happening now. I mean, it goes yeah.
And is that good? Obviously not.
No. So
And at the same time, you've got the guy in New York who's the mayor of New York City.
Bloomberg.
Bloomberg's a billionaire. He can finance himself.
Which is what he did. Apparently, apparently he spent $100 million to be mayor last time. Of his, yeah.
But what's the difference between Michael Bloomberg spending $100 million of his own money and Joe Schmo from the Bronx getting 5 guys to give him $100 million, to become mayor of New York?
I think there's no difference at all. As far as, let me put it this way: if I was in charge of it, if I could just lay down the law myself, there would be nobody would be allowed to accept any contribution over $100 from anybody under any circumstances and for any election cycle.
Okay, would that apply to unions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so a union could not work for a candidate.
Well, a union can volunteer for a candidate. I'm saying that nobody in this country should be allowed to give more than $100 to any PAC or candidate during any election cycle, and that would clean it up.
But doesn't that codify the importance of the political parties themselves, the Republicans and the Democrats? So basically what you're saying is you'll have whomever is running is going to be blessed by the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. There will be no other person.
Well, there are other people. I mean, there was a Green Party candidate last time. Nader ran. I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, if Nader ran because Nader got some support. Now, if somebody would have given Nader 50, 20, $100 million, he could have run a much better campaign. But,
yeah, but if you give some, I'm still not following. I don't understand your point. I mean, if somebody. Do we agree that nobody should be allowed to give more, let's say, than $100 to a candidate?
No, definitely not.
Why don't you agree with that?
Because it is a matter of free speech. At some.
Oh, so you agree with the Citizens United? I see. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Citizens United basically allows, the World Wildlife Fund to give money to whomever. It allows, and
it allows, let's say, the Sheldon Adelson to give $90 million to the Republican candidate, one way or another.
Who's the guy that bankrolls the leftists?
Soros.
Yeah, George Soros. George Soros gives hundreds of millions out. Gave tens of millions.
Yeah, but the way if you look at it honestly, quiet. If you look at it honestly over the whole spectrum, and you look at history, you got George Soros, a guy on one side who contributes, tens of millions of dollars or whatever to Democratic candidates, and then you got 100 people for every George Soros. You got 100 billionaires and multimillionaires on the other side. In other words, clearly, you see in this case, the Republican National Committee is the one that's suing to lift the caps of things. It's not the Democratic National Committee, because clearly the Democrats rely on more small contributions, even though they are still beholden to rich people. What I want to do is make the thing fair for everybody. I don't like the Democrats or the Republicans. They're too into the pockets of the rich. I say lay the law across the board, make it the way the founders imagined it to be. equal. One person, one vote, rich people or rich unions or rich non-governmental organizations. Nobody who's rich or has lots of money should be able to tip the scale against an average citizen like you or me.
Well, you're not telling the truth here.
What? I just did.
If you looked at Wall Street contributions
right.
from McCain for the last two Obama cycles, and probably before that, the Democrats got more money from Wall Street than the Republicans.
That's what I just said. Didn't you just hear me? I said it should be outlawed on both sides. It should be outlawed on both sides.
The Democrats got more money than the Republicans.
Jesus Christ, I feel like I'm talking to a dummy or into thin air. I just said I understand that they're both getting money from, they're both getting tons of money from millionaires, both parties.
Republicans are behind this because the Republicans get more money from the rich, and that is not true.
They have more individual donors with more money. They clearly do.
The multimillionaires go Democrat because the multimillionaires want access to their regulators, so their companies can make money, and by putting out business out of their competitors.
So you really believe that although with Obama, he got most of the Wall Street money last time around, you believe that as a whole, on a historical basis, let's say going back 50 or 60 years, that there's just as many millionaires and rich people like this guy McCutcheon, who's part of this case right now, on the side of the Democrats as the Republicans. Do you really believe that?
Definitely.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Joe.
Michael Bloomberg's a Democrat.
I can't. Who do we have?
This is John.
John? Okay, John, you're on. Hello?
John is not there. We're going to Robert.
Robert, you're on, Robert. Go ahead.
Oh, hey, how you doing?
Okay.
Hey, okay, first of all, why don't we just get money all the way out of politics and make having a license to broadcast dependent upon your willingness to put up operate in the public interest, and that is to say, give free air to candidates during the election cycle, have the election cycle be shorter, and take money completely out of politics.
Even better. That is the obvious solution. That is pure democracy, that you make places that are licensed by the people of the United States, by the FCC, absolutely force them to give up their prime time for like 6 months in a row and, give up, a few $1 billion in profits that they don't need. And make a democracy a democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, they're using our airwaves. Make them pay for them. Okay?
Absolutely. I agree.
But here's the thing. I want to make one more point, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Am I still on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Look, we have attacks on women's rights. We have attacks on the EPA. We have attacks on voting rights, disfranchising voters in different places. Mm-hmm. These are all things that are being done by the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the Republicans keep setting these damn fires, and we keep fighting the fires.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you think it might be a good idea to just take the damn matches away from these people?
And by that you mean
them out entirely.
And how do you mean that exactly?
I mean vote the Republican Party out of existence.
Mm-hmm.
Just vote them out, and then I guess I'll tell you what would happen. The next cycle, you would have third parties running who I would vote for in a heartbeat. Because I would turn to my Democratic brethren and say, guys, I wasn't all that fond of you. You only looked good because you were standing next to a complete asshole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there should be absolutely no money spent on politics, no money on politics whatsoever, on elections, I should say. I think that I think there should be a law that says you give even $1 to a candidate running an election that you get fined $1,000, and if you give over $100, you spend a week in jail and going up from there. It should just be free time on the airwaves, free time in newspapers and magazines, and if you say we're licensing these people, obviously anybody that's licensed by the federal government, and that is the people of the United States, people always confuse the two things, and there's we can understand why, because it seems like they're a separate entity now. But anybody licensed by the federal government to operate as a media organization, and that is the major networks, and a lot of radio stations, they should be forced clearly to provide free airtime for candidates. When it comes, I guess you can't force a private corporation like the New York Times or the Washington Post to have big ads in there. But I wouldn't, I mean, I don't know how you prevent that. Like, what would you say? How do you prevent private media from being bought up by the richest people? I guess you can't, right?
No, I guess I have an answer for that. You say, look, we're going to put a surcharge on that kind of income, and that surcharge covers the opposition's right to have space in the paper as well. So if you buy space in the paper, if someone buys space in the paper, the other guy gets space in the same paper for free.
Well, they used to have something called an equal, a fair election law. I forget what it was. Fairness doctrine, which I remember back. I go so far back in radio that I remember I had a candidate for New York City Council on my show once from one side, and I had to invite the other candidate on. Whether or not I liked them or not. That's the way democracy worked.
Right, and that is the way it should be. But if we had, like I say, if all of these things would be a whole lot easier to get through if we didn't have to, this isn't even close to the conversation we would be having if the Republicans were gone. We'd be having a much better conversation. We'd still be dissatisfied. It's like people say, are you unhappy with Obama? Yeah, well, of course I'm a little unhappy with Obama, but I'd have been suicidal if McCain-Palin had gotten elected. Are you kidding me? I'd bet.
Well, the trouble, but
begin to cut it.
But the problem really is that if you look at the contributions to Obama or to Charles Schumer or Feingold or all these Democrats that run the Congress and the presidency, you have a tremendous number of bankers, hedge fund people, celebrities with tens of millions of dollars. Really, the rich control both parties. That's the problem.
Well, if you're a rich guy and you want a decent market and a thriving economy, you damn sure better be backing Democrats, because Romney would have tanked this place like you wouldn't have believed. So I mean, that was just enlightened self-interest on their part.
Yeah, well, it is. It's like
I wouldn't have elected Romney to wash my damn car.
Yeah, I mean, they're playing both sides of the board there, because either one of the candidates gets elected, there'll be some what the Supreme Court calls possibly gratitude, which is not, they don't equate gratitude with corruption. Of course, I do. So you know what, we have to take a break right now. Are there other calls? Okay, anybody else wants to call up 866-997-4748. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we go straight to your calls. If you're on now, hold on. And if you want, call up and you can join that person. We'll go right to your calls afterwards. Okay, we have Larry. You're on, Larry.
Yeah, Mr. Fetter. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I agree with you. This money deal is it's just golden calf worship, like it always has been. You remember when Moses went away from his former slaves, and when they came back, they had a golden calf set up.
Of course, I don't remember that personally. I'm not that old, but I do. I remember reading about it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up Hendrick Johnson. Do you know Hendrick Johnson?
No, who's that?
It is a teenage black boy that was found down there in Valdosta, Georgia, rolled up in a gymnasium mat.
What is this? Is this referred to the subject we're talking about?
No.
Oh, we only have a couple of minutes left to this hour. And what I would like to do is actually, we have another call, right? Well, I want to go to another call about this issue of campaign finance, and then maybe later on, can you call back about this issue? Do we lose the call?
He's off. We have Frank from Illinois.
Okay, Frank from Illinois, you're on.
Hey, Mike, long time. I also think that if we're going to stop all this money from, which I happen to agree with you on, we ought to stop talk show hosts from putting down our president all the time. And if we can't do that, then we have to have more money to fight talk show hosts who put down our president all the time.
Not a bad idea. Why don't you? You should have your own show.
That's all right. You do good enough. I listen to you. I don't call you much, but I listen to you, Mike.
So I mean, really, I don't know why anybody. It's a mystery to me. I guess my attitude about this is anybody like that guy who called before, Joe, I guess his name is, anybody who wants to allow people with a lot of money to give unlimited amounts of money in politics really clearly doesn't understand democracy, or maybe they just don't like it. Because the whole idea, that the pure idea of democracy is that we're all supposed to be equal. But if some of us are able to give millions of dollars and others can only afford $5, well, that's basically buying the government. I don't know why that's so hard to understand.
Yeah, it's not hard. Can you imagine a stage full of people that we would have on a stage running for office if money wasn't the issue? If all these smart guys who really care and want to just get up there and see what they can do and would vote, the proper way instead of worrying about being reelected. Can you imagine what a stage full of those guys would be like?
Well, it would be an ideal. It would be something to see. I mean, it would be the opposite of seeing all those clowns, for instance, during the Republican primary, you know.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Thanks for calling.
All right, Mike. Nice talking to you.
Okay, Frank. Anybody else there?
We have Jason from D.C.
Jason from D.C., you're on.
Hey, I was just going to comment. You hear me okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to comment specifically about the fact that the Virginia governor's race, I don't know if you've been following it at all.
Is that with Cuccinelli?
Party candidate.
That's with Cuccinelli?
Yeah, Cuccinelli,
yeah.
McAuliffe, and Rob Sarvis.
Right.
So what's happening now is Rob Sarvis was polling, between 9 and 12%, but they won't include him in the debates. And somehow they set this arbitrary number, like you have to be polling 10% in the debates. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, why did they set the number at 10%? And the answer is so that any third-party person that would go against the establishment will never be included in a debate.
That's right.
Just like for the presidential commissions, they set the amount as 15 because when Ross Perot first ran, he was polling 12% before the first debate. And they realized, wait a minute, if we include this guy in, he actually goes up in points, not down in points.
Yeah, and then they don't have to discuss issues which embarrass the both of them, corruption or war or whatever it is, or Social Security, where remember Obama said, I think Mr. Romney and I are basically in agreement on this. You won't have somebody speaking up and giving a point of view like Elizabeth Warren might or somebody,
Well, yeah, I mean, a good example of that would be drug decriminalization, something that would have a profound impact on cleaning up the system, whether it be, business corruption, political corruption, gun deaths, and so forth. That would be an important issue. But, God forbid you're on the stage and actually want to talk about something that would cause a real change. So, I go back to this idea that there's, authoritarians and then there's almost everybody else. And it's the authoritarians on the left and on the right who all want to socially engineer the world, but they never want to do it with persuasion. They want to be able to force you into whatever their particular scheme is, whether they are the left or the right type of player.
Well, with persuasion, there's always the danger it won't work, and the other people, if they get a free voice, will do the persuading.
Well, and the thing, you're right about that. The thing that stands out in my mind, though, is the fact that, we have this myth that we have some sort of a free society in terms of, like, us having voting access. And you're sitting here and you're worried about, like, somebody, they need a driver's license to vote. What good does it doesn't do you any good if the two parties like Coke and Pepsi get to decide who puts their soda on the shelf. They're essentially cock blocking anybody else from being out there. I mean, how would the political landscape have been different if Jill Stein and Gary Johnson had been on the stage during the election?
Oh, it would have been an extraordinary debate. In fact, people would have been much more educated and illuminated about what democracy was all about. I would love to see the president, Obama and Romney, have to answer a question about drone murders of civilians, for instance.
NSA spying.
Yeah.
How about that?
Well, see, this is how it goes. I mean, so I don't know how, when you got the Democratic Party and the Republican Party owning and running Congress, how there'll ever be any law or rule that allows a third-party candidate on. I don't see it.
And the way they do it is they do this through ballot access initiatives. What they do is they prevent you. So let's imagine you're in a state like, Indiana or something. You might have to collect 55,000 signatures just to be on the ballot.
Right.
So any third-party candidate that's running, like I'll take the Libertarians, for example. We only have about 30 seconds left. Yeah. Just the idea is, look, it's a sham. Okay, the Virginia governor's race is going to prove it because again, you keep people out of the debates who actually would probably add something to it, and we're going to see that the debate in Virginia governor's race is going to be a crazy thing that we're going to try to spin it why Cuccinelli lost.
Yeah, no, as long as they keep a third-party candidate off the stage, then Americans will never have a real democracy. It'll just be the two corporate parties. You're absolutely right. All right, thanks for calling. All right, that's it for this hour. The next hour, we're going to talk about the crazy argument that's going on, this government shutdown and the Republican blackmail of the government and the American people about basically about this health care law. And we're going to talk about the health care law, specifically, and whether or not it's even valuable in itself. I mean, is it really worthwhile arguing about? I mean, it is the law of the land, but it's certainly nowhere near what it needs to be. So this is the subject for the next hour. And of course, probably like around 6:30, 20 minutes to 7, we'll have more time to talk about the same issues we're talking about now. So anything you didn't get to call about now, you can call up during that other part of that hour. Okay, thanks for listening, and we'll be back. This is Mike Fader, Sirius Progress 127. Sirius XM Progress 127. We'll be back after the 6 o'clock news. Okay, we have, this is Mike Fader again on Sirius XM Progress 127. Also, again, let me remind you, I welcome any kind of emails. If you want to send me emails about anything you hear on the show, or opinions or disagreements or agreements, and I usually answer every email I get. The way to do that is to go to my website, Fader Files, FEDER FILES, FEDER FILES.com. And also you can get on my mailing list that way too. We have a guest scheduled tonight, this hour, I should say. We have a guest scheduled also at 7, but a guest scheduled this hour to talk about this whole issue of the Affordable Care Act and the mess that it's in, and why it doesn't have to be a mess at all if we just dumped the whole thing and had Medicare for all, single payer. And this is somebody who has been campaigning for this for many, many years, and was one of the leaders of a group called Physicians for National Health Care Plan. And we're looking for her now, trying to find the right phone number, so we hope we can have her on. But let me see if this could be her calling him now. Is it? No? Okay. So anybody else who wants to call up about, we were talking about campaign finance during the last hour, and why anybody could not say, as I mentioned last time, let me say it again. Anybody who thinks that there should be no limit on the ability of a person to pay directly to a candidate clearly does not like a democratic form of government. It's as clear as 2 and 2 is 4 that if you don't put limits on what people can give people, since there is so much income inequality, clearly the rich will wind up giving all the money to, 95% of the money that goes towards election campaigns will come from the rich or a small group of people to candidates. And everybody else, the mass of the American population, all of the voters in the country except for the rich, will be left completely out in the cold and have no influence. So that the laws that get passed will be for the rich. And what is the proof of that? Look at the government right now. Look at it for the last 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years. Look, especially the last 20 years, Democrats and Republicans, Clinton, Bush, Obama. Rich people control Congress and they control the presidency. Obama was practically made in a back room somewhere by very rich people. And, the Bushes are rich, and Romney is rich. It's all about rich people. There are senators and Congress people who have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, some of them. The senator from New York, the senior senator, who is one of the leaders of the Democratic Party, one of the leaders of our government, who has had some of the most powerful influence in all of American government. Laws get passed because he says so. Laws get squashed if he doesn't like them. That's Charles Schumer. He's a Democrat. He is Wall Street's hand puppet. Obama is a servant of the rich. He's an absolute servant of the rich when it comes to raising the income tax on the rich, to try to have anything like a progressive income tax like we had under Eisenhower, under any of the past presidents up until recently, until Bush, when he lowered the boom all the way down. Basically, you have a government of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich. If there was no money in politics, obviously, and you had all the time in the world to campaign, and you had the television stations, you had the radio stations, you had some quid pro quo, you had some way you could appeal to people without money, then you would have a real democratic society. But until then, you're not going to have one. And like somebody mentioned clearly, the Democrats and Republicans keep third-party people off the stage. They keep people off the stage in their own party. So you get a guy like Feingold or somebody else, or Elizabeth Warren. If they wind up with something like 7 or 8% of the vote in a primaries, they're not going to make it onto the stage. You can only have one corporate candidate talking to another corporate candidate. In the end, there'll just be one candidate running against himself, and then there'll be nobody running. It'll just be appointed, and we won't have to vote anyhow. They don't want us to vote. They don't like us to vote. Voting is upsetting for the Democrats and the Republicans. They hate it. They hate that there's an election that they have to run and prove that they're worthwhile, that they actually have to shake people's hand and talk to people and leave their expensive offices in Washington and, give up all their perks for a little while and actually eat hot dogs and talk to the slobs out in their own district and the farmers and the truck drivers or whoever else that vote for them. It bothers them. These people are millionaires, multimillionaires. They hate votes. They don't like elections. It's not a democracy, but we keep pretending it is, and good for us. Do we have any calls there? 866-997, that's the number to call. 866-997-4748. 866-997-4748. You can call about that, or if you want, you can also call about some other issues, too.
We have Tom from Massachusetts.
Tom from Massachusetts, you're on.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Hey.
Hey, I wanted to take issue with your characterization about President Obama being for the rich.
Okay.
I'm sure you're aware that the way the Affordable Care Act is funded is through taxes on the rich.
Mm-hmm.
They increased the capital gains tax by 3.8%.
Mm-hmm.
On people making over $200,000 a year. Also, they increased, another way it's funded is through increasing Medicare withholdings by 1% on people making over $200,000 a year.
Well, that's definitely a step in the right direction. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is a step in the right direction, considering how the wealthy have made out over the past few decades.
Mm-hmm.
But so I don't think it's fair for you to claim that the president is some puppet of the rich when what's going on here in terms of this fight between Republicans and Democrats right now is the Republicans are asking for cuts in government services that are primarily paid for through taxes on the wealthy. People who make between $50,000 and $500,000 a year, they're the ones who pay most of the taxes in the country. People making above $500,000, like Mitt Romney, they get a lot of tax loopholes. That's wrong, obviously, and that should end. But the fact is that primarily wealthy people pay the bulk of federal taxes. And what the Republicans are doing is they're saying, hey, we want to cut down services, so we're not going to have to tax these people anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And what the Democrats are doing is saying, no, we are not going to give in to your demands where you make no concessions. We want some tax increases on people who can afford to pay more. Primarily, they want to close corporate loopholes and stuff because the corporations have been getting away with murder, with all their tax loopholes. But so I don't think it's fair for you to say that Obama and the Democrats, maybe Schumer to some extent, but to make broad generalizations, I don't think it's fair.
Okay. Thanks for calling. Okay. Do we have our guest on?
Yes, we do. Dr. Flowers?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. You're there. Okay.
I am. I apologize. I'm on the road right now.
No, that's okay. Dr. Flowers she's an MD. She's a pediatrician, and she's co-chair of the MD chapter of Physicians for a National Health Plan, and she's also an organizer with PopularResistance.org, and serves as the Secretary of Health for the Green Shadow Cabinet. What is the Green Shadow Cabinet?
The Green Shadow Cabinet is an alternative government project that was launched on Earth Day this year after Jill Stein and Sherry Hunkela's campaign for president and vice president of the Green Party. It's not a project of the Green Party, but has some affiliation because they ran on that ticket. But it's an independent alternative government that's made up of over 90 people with expertise in various areas so that we can offer add to the political dialogue, which is so restricted in this country, where you have the Republicans and the Democrats really only talking about issues within a narrow neoliberal economic agenda type of framework, and there's a really sorely missing the dialogue that puts forth real solutions that are actually supported by the majority of people.
Now, as the Secretary of Health in the Green Shadow Cabinet, let's say that you were actually elected to be the Secretary of Health in a new government. I mean, what is the policy? What is the platform of the Green Shadow Cabinet or the Green, government here as far as health? And we're talking. We see this giant argument right now. The Republicans are having this game to the death with the Democrats about basically they want to destroy the Affordable Care Act, or they want to defund it, whatever it is. But I know, of course, we've talked before, and your position and the position of the Physicians for a National Health Plan has always been Medicare for all, single payer. So, I mean, what is your position on all this?
Right. Well, I mean, the fundamental steps that we need to take in order to start to head in a direction where we actually have a healthier population. Number one, we need to have a publicly financed universal health care system, and that's what a Medicare for All does. That would allow us to actually incentivize improving health instead of the way that our system works right now, which is to make profit for the medical industrial complex, and they do that. They actually profit when people are sicker, so there's no real incentive to make other policy changes in our country that would improve health. So if we had a national, everybody in the same system, publicly financed is the most efficient way to pay for it, that takes that whole profit motive out, and now we're actually about improving the health of our population. And there's so much that we need to do, but those are the first steps, and then we move towards allocating our resources in a fairer way, building up our primary care workforce, which is really necessary, going after the other important issues that affect our health, because our health is only 10% of our health is determined by access to health care. The rest is what are called social determinants. So things like our social determinants, things like wealth inequality has a huge impact on our health, access to education, a job with a living wage, a healthy environment, access to healthy food, clean water, and air. All of these things would have to be addressed as well. But the very minimal step is to get everybody into a publicly financed system that's comprehensive.
There are a lot of people who say, they're talking about the lesser of two evils, and you have to compromise, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, do you see the Affordable Care Act as a step in this direction?
It's not a step in that direction, because the Affordable Care Act actually takes us towards greater privatization of our health care, does nothing to control our overall health care spending, and actually lowers the bar for what is considered to be acceptable health insurance, whereas before, people really fought to have that bar at 80%. Insurance companies should cover 80% of services, which is even, that in itself still puts barriers to care.
Oh, sure.
People have to pay for 20%. But now we've lowered that bar to 60%. So that a 60% coverage plan is completely acceptable. And what's amazing to me is the actually more than $1 trillion that we're going to now take out of our public funds and give directly to private health insurance companies to subsidize inadequate insurance. And I think that it's important for listeners to understand when they hear things like, oh, well, now insurance companies are going to be regulated and they have to take everybody with pre-existing conditions, that, of course, the insurance companies have ways to work around that by restricting their networks, avoiding hospitals that actually take care of very sick patients. They'll be able to move out of areas if they find that they're selling policies in a certain area and people in that area tend to have more health problems. They'll just pull their policies out if they're not making the profits they want to make. So we really haven't addressed that fundamental way that healthcare is in this country, which is that health insurers are profit-making ventures, and they see healthcare as a commodity and a product, and not really don't have an allegiance to the health of our population.
Now, obviously, and everybody talks about this all the time, there are many other countries in the world that have a single-payer type system or a Medicare for all type system, but I get many calls on the show here all the time saying, I live in Canada, I was in England, it's not in paradise, it's not what you think it is. I mean, is there really a clear, it's like, is it really in another league, so much better for the citizens of each country that has this?
No system is perfect. You constantly have to work to improve it. What's interesting is what people consider to be dissatisfied with their systems. Like in France, which is the best system, you will still hear people that are dissatisfied with that system. But when you look at the complaints they have, we would be like so happy to just have those minimal complaints. Like there was a survey that only 92% of people were happy with the care they got in the emergency room, and the system was upset about that. Now that's a bar we would love to have here in this country. In Canada and these other countries, they may have waiting lines for things that are not acute or emergent, but we have 50 million people in this country that can't even get into a line that would be happy to have a line to get into for care that was paid for up front. So you have to look at, kind of everything is relative, right? But no system is perfect. What we have here is clearly we spend 2.5 times more per person per year on health care than the average industrialized nation, and our health outcomes are poorer, and our life expectancies are poorer.
I have a friend who's a vet of the Korean War, old now, and developed a certain kind of leukemia, and takes a special drug for this. I forget what the name of it is. Each pill is $80. He has to take 6 pills a day. It's $17,800 a month that the Veterans Administration pays for. So when we talk about health insurance companies, we also need to talk about drug companies too, and the profits they make. Under a single payer or Medicare for all, like a system in France, what are drug costs like?
Right, we spend a lot more for drugs here than people do for the same drugs in other countries because we don't negotiate. Some systems do, and actually the VA is one system that does negotiate drug prices. But when you have a single-payer system, it's called a monopsony. It's a single purchaser, and that gives you a tremendous amount of negotiating ability so that we could negotiate for fairer prices for medications, medical devices, and even for health services. We pay more for health services here than and we don't really have a rational way of determining what the appropriate price for a service is.
When you have discussions like we're having right now, all of this takes place within a kind of a gigantic, invisible framework, but it's still there, of capitalism. You know what I mean? Like, is there any reason why any company that has to do with anybody's health should make a profit at all?
Right, when they're profiting off of suffering and preventable deaths, that seems really wrong. And that's why healthcare is something that doesn't belong in the marketplace. And it drives me crazy right now because you hear Kathleen Sebelius and others are just raving about this new health insurance.
Yeah, that's right.
As if that's a good thing. No, healthcare is not something that you can decide whether you need it or not. When it comes down to, illnesses, accidents, we don't have a choice about whether we get treated. And just the policy, evidence shows that when you treat health as a public good, when you have a public health system, it's less expensive, you have a healthier population. So, I agree with you. It's not right to profit off of necessary care.
Well, but then you start extending it to everything. Paying for water, paying for electricity. I live in New York City, and you go to a doctor in New York City. A lot of them constantly are opting out of Medicare, by the way. Increasingly, a lot of doctors in New York City are opting out of Medicare so that pay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nationwide, it's actually increasing. Over the last couple of years, 30,000 more doctors have come into Medicare. So, well,
that's probably, Manhattan is really a very special place. There's so many rich people that live here. They can afford to do that here.
Right.
That the patients will still keep coming. But, to me, I always wonder, you're a doctor. Do most doctors become doctors to save people's lives or to help people or to alleviate suffering and pain? Or do most doctors, or do a lot of doctors do it because they know they're going to wind up being rich?
It's interesting. The majority.
And remember, I'm from New York, so. Yeah,
the majority of medical students start out wanting to do primary care, and which really is people go into primary care because they want to help people. It's not a huge money-making venture most of the time. Mm-hmm. So there are these new boutique practices, but because of the costs of medical education, which have just ballooned, so that medical students are coming out with these tremendous debts, and the fact that we don't pay primary care doctors very well, they're kind of forced into this economic choice of going into specialized medicine or the higher paying higher paying fields, and our whole medical education really needs some work as well. And these are the kinds of things that we need to work on. Once we get this profit out of our system that's sucking up so much of our healthcare dollars that should be used for healthcare and medical education and those kinds of things.
Well, and then you get this kind of thing where, like, my healthcare insurance company is Cigna. And, I have a primary care doctor who's under Cigna, so you get to see him for he has 20 patients in 1 hour. And, you get there and you can hardly say anything. He says, okay, take some of this, thank you very much. And you don't get to ask, you don't get to follow up on anything, so they jam a whole lot. This is the health insurance, because of health insurance companies. They jam in something like, I don't know, I was exaggerating, but they'll jam in anywhere from 8 to 15 patients in an hour if they can get away with it.
And the doctors don't really like that either, that pressure. And that's actually was what the tipping point that made me leave practice, was being forced into that model of having to see more patients in an hour, and that if they had more than one complaint, I was not supposed to address.
Oh, right, yeah.
More than one complaint. That's the business model because of you fight so much to be paid for the care that you deliver from the insurance companies that it's creating this vicious cycle where doctors are trying to see more and more patients so that they can try to actually keep their offices open. I mean, that's for primary care doctors.
Yeah.
It's different for doctors who are, specialists and do procedures and things like that.
Well, one last question. Do doctors in these systems, like in France, do they have complaints? I mean, are they making a living that makes them feel like they're well rewarded or amply enough rewarded for their efforts and their education?
A very good friend of mine is a surgeon in Paris, and he actually won't practice here in the United States. He's very happy there, even though he actually goes back and forth. He does some research here in the U.S. He loves practicing in France. He doesn't have an office manager because when his patients come in, they just swipe their card that everybody has, and that's the paperwork. And so his assistants help with scheduling the patients. And when he sees a unique case that needs a different type of treatment and he contacts the health system to get authorization for that, he speaks with other doctors in that same field so they can actually kind of a meeting of the minds and determine if what he's putting forth is a good idea or maybe they have other suggestions. It's all about the health of the patient. It's a very different environment. Doctors are both happy there and are, make a fine living, and you have to remember they have a lot of other social infrastructure like free education and excellent, inexpensive public transportation, things like that.
Well, last question. I'm sorry, I keep this is the last question. Dr. Flowers, Margaret Flowers is with us, and where can people go? Where's a couple of good websites for people to go to join this whole movement towards getting the real kind of healthcare program that we need?
All right. Well, we're continuing to push for a Medicare for All solution, and Physicians for National Health program puts up articles daily, as well as they have other educational tools, especially for people that are new to learning about this, so they can find those there. And then the grassroots kind of group is Healthcare Now, and it's healthcare-now.org. So pnhp.org or healthcare-now.org.
So this is the last question then. A lot of people, when they talk about Affordable Care Act, and if they so much want this better program, Medicare for all, single pay or whatever, they would almost go so far. I've heard people go so far as to say they hope the Affordable Care Act fails. In other words, you get people on what's called the left, or people who want this kind of this better kind of real affordable care. They hope it fails along with the people on the right, but obviously for completely different reasons. I mean, it's kind of a moral position. I mean, there are millions of people who are going to get some kind of health care now that they didn't get before. I mean, how does it all work? And how do we move from this, or how do we argue against this to move to the other, politically even?
I guess the way that we look at it is if you look at similar legislations that have been enacted at the state level, they haven't met their goals of ensuring everybody or containing health care costs, and so they have to keep raising prices and cutting back on benefits, and then ultimately those systems fail. We've documented this time after time. So it's not a matter of wanting this to fail, it's just knowing that this bill did not address the underlying problems, and so it will eventually fail. In the meantime, as it fails, we'll continue to have tens of millions of people without insurance. We'll have people that are self-rationing. They're not getting care because they may pay for a premium, but they can't afford the out-of-pocket cost to actually get health services. So the preventable deaths are going to continue. Suffering is going to continue. People will still go bankrupt. And these are morally wrong. Mm-hmm. So we have to push for the real solution that's going to guarantee every person in this country access to the medical care that they need.
So,
payer system.
So why don't you give the website or a couple of websites where people can go again before we have to break for a commercial here?
Sure, thank you. It's pnhp.org. That stands for Physicians for a National Health Program, and then healthcare-now.org.
Okay, and as you mentioned, it's always important to remember that all of these things are connected. And when we talk about income inequality, we're talking about racism, you talk about anything, and poverty and poor education, it's all connected. Everything is connected. So when you look for a political party, probably a good idea to go towards the Green Party, who understands these connections and wants to do something about it. Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you for having me on.
Okay, right. This is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Progress 127. We are going to go to a break, and when we come back, we can take your calls. Obviously, what's going on is a gigantic blackmail. Normally, I don't pick one party over the other because, to me, they're both corporate parties. I know people disagree with that, but I feel very strongly that way. And I'm very much into a third party, especially a place like the Green Party, like a woman I just talked to, or Jill Stein or somebody like that. If I have one or two, there's maybe a handful of people in the Democratic Party that I would back, like Alan Grayson, maybe Elizabeth Warren, and that's about it. But clearly what's going on now is you do have one party and one group of very extreme, it seems like insensitive, somewhat stupid people, perhaps backed by the rich, I don't know, in one party, the Republican Party, who are moving their entire party to blackmail the entire American public. I mean, what's happening really in this government shutdown and maybe this refusal to raise the debt ceiling, I mean, it's not even real money anyhow. It's like fake money on a computer borrowed from China, whatever that means. But obviously it has to be raised for it to continue the way it does. But what you have is one party or one small group in a party shifting an entire party to blackmail the entire American democratic process. You have this Affordable Care Act, which is no good at all, really, in the end. It's not going to do the job that it's supposed to do. And it's got all kinds of serious problems. It'll probably cause it to sink anyhow, and it's not going to really help people in the end. But still, you have this. This was debated over years and years and years. Violent arguments, verbal arguments, all kinds of bribery going on, lobbying, writing and rewriting of bills. The whole thing was going on for years. Finally, it passes. It is voted through Congress. It goes to the president. He signs it, of course. Then it is reviewed by a conservative Supreme Court, and they approve of this law. So the entire democratic process worked the way the founders wanted it to work. A tremendous debate, compromises, so many compromises that the Affordable Care Act is really, in many ways, just as bad almost as it was, the situation was before, in some cases worse. But compromises, this is democracy, arguments, debates, bills voted on, laws signed into, a bill signed into law, reviewed by the Supreme Court. So the whole democratic process proceeded the way it's supposed to proceed, according to the Constitution. And now a bunch of people who are basically sort of like gangsters or people who are on a highway holding up a stagecoach from the old days, or, you know, trying to jump into a train and empty everybody's wallets or else they can't go anywhere. The people are actually blackmailing the American government and holding up the entire process of democracy and paying people. There are hundreds of thousands of government workers out of jobs who don't have the money right now to pay their bills. We could run into a kind of a default, which would throw us into a recession, put the whole world into another recession or a depression, just because these core group of very loony, very insensitive, very strange people are blackmailing the entire government. I don't really get it. And one thing for sure is that if Obama, who doesn't have much of a spine to speak of, he is not giving in to anything that they're demanding. And why should he? As much as I don't like him, as much as I don't like the Affordable Care Act, you can't have people in Congress, a small group of people, blackmailing the American government, which is to say the American people, and you can't have them deciding that they don't like to process. It's like everybody went about doing this in the way that they're mandated to according to the Constitution. It was a democratic process reviewed by the Supreme Court. They don't like it, so they're like a little babies throwing a tantrum and saying that nobody can have anything. There's no inspection of food. There's no inspection of drugs. The national parks are closed. They are closing down the government. And what's happening is clearly that most of the people in this country can see that it is them that is closing everything down. It's not the president that's shutting things down. It's they that are closing things down by throwing this childish tantrum and putting hundreds of thousands of people out of work. I mean, these government employees have jobs that have to support their families. They have to pay their rent like everybody else. In Congress, they keep getting paid. The people who are shutting down the government, who are putting on people on forced furlough, hundreds of thousands of people, these people keep getting their salaries. They make $172,000 a year. I think that's the average for a senator and congressman. They keep getting paid, no matter that they're putting everybody else out of work, that they're closing down essential services, Center for Disease Control, EPA, you name it. They hate government. They want the whole thing to be privatized. And basically what they're doing is this is like an attack on the government by terrorists. This is a kind of a terrorist attack on democracy. It's quite extraordinary to see this happen. And if the president of the United States and the people and the rest of the people in Congress, including the intelligent, decent Republicans, if they give in to this, then it's like giving in to blackmail. We can go on huff and puff all we want about how we don't negotiate with terrorists and terrorists are everywhere and we won't accede to their demands. But to give 1 inch to these people in the House of Representatives is acceding to the demands of basically terrorists against our own political system. Anyhow, we're going to take a break. If you have an opinion on this, which I presume you do, 866-997-4748. You can call in during the break, and we'll put you right on. Okay, what we're going to do now is go to Kevin in Queens. You're on, Kevin.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey.
I liked the lady you just had on, the doctor, and she seemed like she's very sincere about her efforts.
She is.
And one thing that you guys did mention, I use the VA hospital in Manhattan, and even though I'm not 100% happy with them, one thing I do got to say, though, is that a lot of times, most times when I sit down with a doctor, since the profit factor is not there, I guess, they do take their time with me. I get follow-up phone calls, and that's a rare thing these days.
Yeah, my friend who goes there to the Veterans Hospital is pretty well satisfied with the care he gets there as compared to other hospitals he's gone to in the city.
The one thing, and I've actually called my senators about this and Congress people, is if you don't have this is how I believe it works in the Manhattan VA. I don't know if it's all VAs, but like me at the moment, I don't have a service-connected disability. Like I haven't put a claim in yet, and I'm actually in the process of putting a claim in. But like, give me an example. Say you come back from war and you're like, you know what? Thank God I didn't get hurt. I'm doing okay. I'm not going to make a claim. We as veterans, without a service-connected disability, we do not get dental, which I think is wrong. We don't. I mean, it's great to go there, but I've always asked, like, why don't we get dental? I'm like, it doesn't. The
dental either doesn't exist or barely exists on most health plans, anyhow. Even if you work in an office or something like that, that's one of the last things you get, and you don't get much of it.
Yeah, but when I called the senators, I said people that are on Medicaid get full dental, and we don't. And I said, I don't think that's fair.
Well, the whole trick in the United States is to be very rich or very poor. Otherwise, you're in a lot of trouble. And
I think the doctor mentioned this too. I briefly went on site for the I was about to say Obamacare. I don't like that name. The
Affordable Care Act. Yeah.
And man, when I looked at it, I'll be honest with you, I said, wow, this is kind of pricey. And then as the doctor mentioned, if you're on the low plan, which seemed kind of pricey enough, 60% 40% out of your pocket.
I know, it's nuts. Nobody can afford that. And I hate the way they call these things. It's a bronze, a silver, and a gold, and a platinum or something. I mean, basically, most of us are on a lead plan here,
Yeah, and that just sets up a system of like a caste system.
Yeah, and like she said, people are just going to go bankrupt anyhow. Who could afford to pay 40% of any kind of medical bill in this country? It's nuts. We're a drug.
As she said, 20% is bad enough.
Yeah. And the health insurance companies barely let you do that. I mean, they're in business of, how they do. They lose your bill, they deny service even though they know they're wrong. I mean, this Affordable Care Act is no good. It's not going to work. And if some few people get some care, they're still going to wind up going broke doing it. Anyhow, I should move on and take another call. So.
All right, Mike, take care.
Okay, thanks for calling, Kevin. What do we have?
Next, we have Mitchell from New Jersey.
Mitchell from New Jersey. You're on, Mitchell.
Hey, long time no speak.
Hey.
How you doing?
Okay.
Mike, I have a lot of comments on this. I do agree with the Physicians for a National Health Care Plan. It obviously makes sense. The system we have now puts the government in a position of paying for the costliest segment of society. We pay all the Medicare bills for the elderly. We pay the disabled bills for the people with disabilities. We pay the veterans bills, and consequently, the insurance companies are getting the premiums and the profits from the healthier segments. So the government writes the checks and the insurance companies cash them. And the only way you can straighten out that imbalance is through a national system. However, I've actually spoken with the New Jersey director for PNHP. His name is Wink Delaway. He's on their site, and he actually brought up some interesting points. Now he kind of flavors the Affordable Care Act, but he thinks that will bring us closer to a national health care system. I mean, and the reasoning is this: the national health care system. The Affordable Care Act will bring, in theory anyway, it should bring millions and millions of people into the system. People have been completely reluctant, and I think even the Republicans recognize this, to give up their benefits once they have them. And then you have a system that's just not cost efficient. You look at that article, I don't know if did you read the article Bitter Pill in Time magazine? Mike?
Yeah,
Hello?
sorry. God, there was a little hitch in the microphone there. Go ahead.
Okay. Did you read the article Bitter Pill in Time magazine?
No.
Okay, it was the entire magazine. It was about all the overpricing and everything else that was going in the system today. It was by Steve Brill, and he came to his final conclusion after looking at all the charges and outrageous charges that are going on in the system right now is that the only cost-effective system is Medicare, which is basically socialized medicine.
No, it's true. The administrative overhead is minuscule compared to health insurance companies, And to doctors, when you go to a doctor's office, there are 6 people in my doctor's office, no matter what doctor I go to, on the phone with health insurance companies. So I have to pay a higher price because he's hired those people to deal with health insurance companies.
Exactly. What's going to happen, I think, is that the Republicans are refusing to, the governors of these states now, I mean, this is a heartbreaking thing. They're not allowing the people who really are desperately poor, to get free, 100% reimbursed Medicaid money. They're putting a hole in their state budgets now just to keep them off of the system because they want this whole thing to fail. And there have been some anecdotal reports that they're messing around with the state websites and the navigators to get even the care that's affordable through the Affordable Care Act. But I think that, eventually people will sign on to this. It will be better than what we have currently, prior to the act. It certainly is. We got a long way to go. And I think that people will eventually, put a lot of pressure on the system. And then we're going to have to, face a single-payer system at some point in time. But the reason that we don't have it goes back to your first hour. There's too much money by lobbyists going into the system and fighting this tooth and nail. And look at what's going on now with this medical device tax. Where the hell did this come from? I mean, this had to be lobby money going into it. I mean, all of a sudden, out of the blue. The big issue is the medical device tax. I mean, because this is what the congressmen are concerned about? The profits of medical device companies? I mean, come on. I mean, so you could see it, politically, the way I think this is a bridge to a single-payer system.
Well, I hope it is, and I hope it's not just a cancer. It's a Band-Aid that somebody just decided to put over a patch of cancer. Whereas you're looking at the Band-Aid and saying, "Oh, we did something." Meanwhile, the cancer spreads all the time. I should move on. Take another call.
Be well.
Okay, Mitchell. Thanks. What do we have?
Next, we have Mitchell from Thomas from Maryland. Excuse me.
Thomas from Maryland. You're on, Thomas. You there, Thomas?
Hi.
Hi.
I've heard that lady speak before to this position. She's very good. And I think what another powerful force who derailed this in past decades is the AMA, who controls a lot of the medical coding, what should be charged, or what services, service coding, and how many doctors they can graduate from schools in the United States. We have a shortage of primary care, and like you said, someone needs to address the cost of medical school education, and the reason why there needs to be more money put towards primary care doctors instead of saying everyone needs to be a specialist, because primary care is the front line. There are
countries, some of these countries that have these Medicare for All plans also have cheaper medical school education.
Right.
Yeah.
I've started taking a look at some of the Obamacare stuff or Affordable Care Act. Well, it's not so affordable. Those high deduction plans are an abomination as far as I'm concerned. But it still leaves the people going, even though there's a cap. Thank goodness. One good thing about it is there's no lifetime cap, and there's an annual cap that's more reasonable than traditionally. It's around $5,000 to $6,000. There's still a lot of money, but for an individual and like $10,000 for a family.
Yeah, it is a lot of money.
Which is still a lot, but it used to be, worse than that. But this is something because Obama doesn't like opposition. He rolled over and went. This is the Republican plan as an answer to Hillary Care. And high deductibles still mean people won't go to the emergency room, or they'll go to the emergency room after things are too bad, or they won't go to the doctor because high cost is a deterrent to seeking medical care until you're in such bad shape you decide to go seek medical care. And he did some very duplicitous things, like he tried to pretend that he was fighting the drug companies. There's some memos to come out where that was just a sham. And the public option, which I would have liked because it would put a lot of pressure on insurance companies, was just something to split the people who were going after single payer and saying, well, you can get the public option, but knowing all the time they didn't plan to really do a real robust public option. I think we should look at Switzerland, who has a heavily regulated private insurance companies, but they can't make profit on basic care, period.
Well, that's the bottom line here, is nobody should be making profit, especially a lot of profit, on people's suffering. They just shouldn't. We shouldn't live in a world like that.
So I think now that I see what this Obamacare is, it's very disappointing in terms of the cost. Now, the one thing he did that is good, but like because of the Supreme Court, including the so-called more moderate or liberals, did something that's been unheard of before, which is saying the federal government can't put strings on something to induce it. I don't know where they saw that precedent, because guess what the highway fund is? You do this or we won't give you highway funds. They're not saying, they're not compelling the states to do it. They're saying you have a choice. And that's what Obama tried to do with the Medicare funding. And somehow even some of the liberal judges says you can't compel states by dangling money in front of them. I don't understand that, but that would have put a lot of more people on Medicaid, which is more cost savings and more affordable, but now those people don't get that. But the stuff in between, above the Medicaid stuff, is bad. Unless you have a lot of money, is expensive, and they admit it's not as good as most employer plans.
All right, thanks for calling. What do we have?
All right, next we have Guillermo from Mexico.
Guillermo from Mexico, you're on. Guillermo, is it? You there?
I just had it. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay, great. Just a quick question. I had heard that the premiums were going to be based on your income, and when I went on the website, it didn't ask me about my income at all. Do you know?
No, actually, I really don't know. I haven't, I haven't followed that part of it. I haven't.
Okay, so all right, that's fine. So my second question is, you just mentioned a little bit ago, as much as I don't like Obama, why don't you like Obama? What's your beef with him?
You must be kidding. Have you listened to the show over the last couple of years?
I haven't heard your show ever.
Oh, really? Well, you know what? Unfortunately, I don't have 100 hours to list every last thing that I don't like about the man. I think basically he's a creature of rich people. I think he violates the Constitution in so many different ways. I don't have time to enumerate them, like spying on the American people, like drone attacks where he blows people up and kills civilians, where he, there's so much stuff that I have talked about for hundreds of hours for the last couple of.
Did you like George Bush?
No, did you?
No, I didn't.
So what's that got to do with one? What's that got to?
Bush and you don't like Obama.
Right, right. Who do I like? I like Jill Stein from the Green Party. I like Rocky Anderson from the Justice Party.
Who do you like that could ever have a chance to be president?
Elizabeth Warren might have a chance.
Do you think so?
That's what I just said.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And what? How would you change the Affordable Care Act so you like it?
I would eliminate it, and have Medicare for all, single payer Medicare for all.
Yeah, but you're never going to be able to get that past the Republicans.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks for calling. Who do we have?
We have Richard from Michigan.
Richard from Michigan, you're on. Go ahead, Richard.
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to mention I'm going to be changing the subject, but it concerns the shutdown the Republicans, Tea Partiers did, and I was just amazed about how you said it was just a terrorist way that they conducted themselves. Because I just wrote my representative, and I'd encourage anybody, because whose representative is a Tea Party and sorts of Republican, and tell them just the same thing, because that's just what I did just yesterday. I wrote him and told him, and I don't have any problem with telling him exactly what he is as terroristic, and that.
Well, it's an overused word, but in fact, they're blackmailing the American people, and blackmail is against the law.
Yeah, well, it's basically terroristic in nature, in its nature, and I just wanted to mention, I'm really surprised that you used that word. That's the words I used to inform him what he was doing, and think if they're tyrants. They say they're against the tyrants and that they don't want to be tread on. But that's exactly what they are, is the tyrants.
Yeah, it's ironic. They throw all these words around like tyrannical, then they throw words around like liberty. But in fact, they are the dictators. A small group of people want to dictate to the entire American people that a law that was passed and reviewed by the Supreme Court shouldn't exist. So they're going to hold up the entire government. Basically, it's like a holdup. It's a holdup. It's like running into a bank and holding it up.
Yeah, they are. They are the tyrants. They are the tyrants.
Yeah.
Do you really think the American people? Honestly, Mike, I respect your opinions and your thoughts about a lot of things. Do you really think the American people are seeing through this?
All I can say is that I read polls in various places, and the latest poll I read, which was yesterday afternoon, conducted by some large organization, said that something like 56% of the people they polled have decided that it is the Republicans who are shutting everything down, and 32% decided it was the Democrats. In other words, there is a huge majority of people right now that sees right through this and sees really who's at fault here. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, that is encouraging.
Yeah.
I appreciate listening to you, Mike, and keep at it.
Well, thanks for calling. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else?
Ed from Canada.
Ed from Canada, you're on. Go ahead.
Hey, Mike, I just want to applaud you for calling this what it is. When you're talking about it being a terrorist act on the U.S. public.
I think having said that, you do have to watch out for a word like that. I mean, it's a pretty loaded word, but just the same, go ahead.
Anyways, I just want to applaud you for that, because nobody else is saying that. They're all stepping around it and sugarcoating it and stuff. And I'm from Canada, and our medical plan up there, like I'm a single person. I make $70,000 a year, and I got my medical insurance through my company. I pay $49 a month.
Wow.
Full coverage. I have full coverage. I'm covered in Canada, U.S., and Mexico.
Wow. That really is something. That's really something.
And then I look at what you guys are going to pay for medical, and I'm thinking, how can you live?
Well, I mean, even like at one of the lower levels of this Affordable Care Act, there's somebody from the administration was bragging the other day about how it would only cost $2,500 a year in a deductible. $2,500 a year. The average family makes something like $55,000 a year. That's gross. Then you take the taxes out of it. Then they pay their rent. Then they pay for food. Then they pay for clothes. Who's got $2,500 a year? I don't. I don't.
And taxes on your house or your mortgage or.
This is why it's a bad plan. This is why it's a terrible plan. And I hope it does fail. And I hope we move on to the plan that we should all have, which is Medicare for all. You know what? I'm at the end of the hour. We've got to wrap it up, and then we're going to move on and come back after 7 o'clock. So thanks for calling. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for letting me on. You have a good day. Good weekend.
Okay, you too. That's it for this hour. We'll be back after 7 o'clock. We're going to have another guest on talking about illegal drilling for oil and gas going on off the coast of California near earthquake faults. Why not? What the hell, right? And it'll all be like some bad movie, and it already is. So that's going to be after the 6 o'clock news. And then we will continue to take calls, and I hope you all call back. Don't be upset if I cut you off or yell at you. You can always try again. It's a democracy, right? I have a bad temper. But if you want to call back and tell me I'm all wrong and I'm a communist or whatever it is, feel free. You pay for this. You pay for the subscription. You should be able to do it. So we'll be back after the 6 o'clock news, and we'll have our guest on. And then we'll take your calls on this shutdown and this bribery scheme and this blackmail scheme, which has to be resolved by Monday. Okay, this is Mike Feder. We're back again. Sirius XM Progress 127. We are here every Saturday evening from 5 to 8 Eastern and 2 to 5 Western time, and whatever it is in the middle there. And we have guests on every week. We talk about political issues, obviously. This is a political talk show. And do we have our guest on? We do.
Yes, the guest is in.
Okay. As I mentioned before, fracking obviously is an important issue, and it's something that's happening more and more all the time. You constantly are reading now that the United States is almost completely energy self-sufficient when it comes to natural gas, and this is changing a lot of things in the world. It's also changing politics. This is one of the things that people talk about all the time, is that if we could be energy self-sufficient in here, and this is based on fossil fuels, obviously, that we wouldn't have to get entangled in wars in the Middle East and other places in the world. Well, obviously, now we're seeing that even if we are energy self-sufficient or approaching it, even if it is fossil fuel, that's not stopping the American government from getting involved in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, and every place else. So that really wasn't the reason, which is pretty obvious to a lot of people. In any case, fracking is an issue, and we are not that far away. It's only a couple of years away from what happened with British Petroleum in the Gulf of Mexico, the astounding amount of destruction, and all these other things that happen all the time. Now, off the California coast, there is fracking going on, or fracking being considered, more fracking being considered near Santa Barbara, out in the ocean on the continental shelf. And we have somebody on here who's going to talk about what's going on out there. It's Mike Ludwig, who is an investigative reporter who covers politics and the environment for the online magazine truthout.org. If you've never gone to truthout.org, truth and out, one word, check it all the time. Sign up to get updates from them. They're a terrific organization. Hello, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure, you're welcome. So what is happening now out on the coast of California, out in the ocean on the coast of California? Is there active fracking going on? Because you were writing articles that discuss violations of federal regulations and violations of federal law that are taking place, right?
Right. Well, now this was a big surprise to everyone in California. It was a big surprise to not only environmentalists out there, but also to public officials. they did not know. Most of the public did not know. Environmentalists did not know, and the regulators, the state regulators, and the California Coastal Commission, and that's actually the board that protects the coastal resources for the state. All those people did not know that they were using fracking technology in the ocean until about 2012, when we first ran a story on it. We found out that it had been used once. Fracking technology had been used once in the outer continental shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And then I continued investigating this. I said, well, if they used it once, they might be using it again. There's a certain shale formation, very oil-rich in that area underneath the seabed there. So I started asking federal regulators, are you approving this? Are you using this technology? Are you allowing companies to use this technology in the ocean?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, you're going to have to file an official FOIA to find out about that, which I did, and I found out that, yes, they had actually approved a permit earlier this year. I filed another FOIA, found out they actually approved 4 permits this year. If these, and now those fracking permits are scheduled for about 2014, early 2014. However, after environmentalists learned about it, after lawmakers learned about it, after people in California became very concerned, they said, we didn't know that we were using this technology in the ocean. That's a whole host of new risks.
Mm-hmm.
They pointed out that they should be, under federal law, under the National Environmental Protection Act, they should be conducting environmental reviews to use this kind of technology in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out, according to my latest investigation, they categorically excluded, the federal regulators, that is, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, is the permitting group. They categorically excluded these from these reviews, these environmental reviews.
Why would they do that? Why on earth would they do that?
Well, it takes a long time and some money to conduct a review like that, and the oil companies probably don't want to spend the time or the money. They want to just deploy this technology now. And so the regulators argue that this is just a minor addition to whatever permit they already approved. So this is not a big deal. This is just a minor revision to the original oil drilling plan, and we're just kind of let this go through. We're just going to rubber stamp this through. Well, meanwhile, environmentalists are saying, no, we need to study this. We don't know what the risks are. This could seriously harm marine life.
Well, so this organization, I don't know, it's an agency. What is it? The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which I never heard of before. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Is that a federal agency?
Right. There's now, after the Gulf oil spill, the federal agencies that regulate offshore drilling were reorganized, and what came out of the reorganization of the Department of the Interior was the BOEM, which you just mentioned, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and then FESI, Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement.
I'm sorry, we're having a lot of trouble with your signal. So, what's that second agency?
It's the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement.
Yeah. And that's the agency that actually permits offshore oil drilling and actually gave out the permits for the offshore fracking. Well, I mean, would you can't make accusations because you're getting accused of libel and you can get in a lot of trouble, especially you're a reporter and you're a journalist, even if you may not be covered by the Media Shield law, which might happen someday. You can't say that there's a reason. There's no good reason why. So these agencies are supposed to. Why are they there? Are they there to give out permits to oil companies so that oil companies or gas companies can make money? Or are they there to protect the public of the United States? Or are they there to make sure that we have a lot of energy available to this country? Is it all three, or is one more important than the other? What is their actual job?
It's all three, and it depends on who you talk to. They definitely give out permits so the oil industry can make money.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely, in theory, the regulatory agencies that are supposed to protect public resources. And they're also very active in actually studying these oil and gas formations to make sure that there's energy available for our domestic market.
Mm-hmm.
They serve all three functions. Now, what the environmentalists are saying in regards to offshore fracking, for instance, is that they should have reviewed this technology or environmental impact and produced a public impact statement, something to share with the public, say, here's the risk, here's the dangers, this is why we decided to allow this to happen, or why we didn't, and here's the alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do that. What they did was they just modified whatever existing permit the oil company already had gotten. And this existing permit was categorically excluded from a federal environmental impact review. And that's because they argue that their regulators looked at it, they don't think there's any safety issues, they allowed it to happen. Environmentalists disagree. I think there's more safety issues, and they haven't studied it enough. And that's
Well,
where we're at now.
how could anybody assert that there is no safety issue if they don't study if there's a safety issue?
And I think that's what the environmental groups at the Center for Biological Diversity, which just last week said if you don't halt fracking in the ocean, we're going to file a legal challenge and try to get an injunction to stop it. So I'm sure that's what they would argue.
Well, what is the difference between the fracking technique in the ocean and the standard old-fashioned drilling techniques?
Well, drilling is actually used as a drill, right?
Okay.
Now, hydraulic fracturing uses pressurized chemicals, sand, and a salty water that's actually forced deep into the rock formation to break up rock. In the ocean, what they're doing is they're fracturing existing wells. These are wells that were already milked for oil.
Yeah.
It's getting hard to get more oil out of them. To stimulate oil production, they're going to go in there and break up rock using the hydraulic fracturing technology with this pressurized this pressurized cocktail of chemicals and water.
How could anybody imagine that putting all these chemicals into the ocean is not going to be a bad thing?
Right. Now, what the industry would say is actually this happens underground, and we have a closed system so that the chemicals won't escape. But actually, since there is little regulation for this kind of technology, under existing permits, they could just dump some of this wastewater that comes back up from it overboard, or they could treat it and then dump it overboard. But we don't know if they're taking all the chemicals out of it at their treatment center.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that is what environmentalists are certainly concerned about. This thing, we don't understand how you can use this technology in the ocean without posing a threat to the marine environment.
Right.
And then,
So
that's what they wanted to be studied.
It's interesting. During our conversation, we must have used the word public maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 times already.
Sure.
So you say it's in the public interest. The public has a right to know. They're supposed to have a study so that the public is aware, et cetera, et cetera. But all of this is taking place in some sort of closed series of offices between environmental offices and the Bureau of whatever the hell it is, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, et cetera. But the actual public, you and me and everybody else, I mean, we're having this conversation now because you wrote this article and I read it, but 99.9% of the American public has no idea that this is happening, and how would they ever have any idea? I mean, why is it there's no actual public review? It's not stated in the newspaper that these companies have asked for permits. It's not stated in a newspaper or broadcast on television that they've asked for these permits, right?
Well, absolutely, and that was what was troubling about this specific investigation, was that, when I started asking questions about ocean fracking, I wasn't getting a lot of answers. And when I actually just said, here, will you hand me the permits? Here, I just want the public documents. Give me the public information copy of these permits. They asked me to file a Freedom of Information Act request, which I did.
Yeah.
But those things should be publicly available, and that's why it was surprising to most of California to find out this was happening, because it was happening very quietly, and no one knew about it.
So what?
There wasn't any public reporting.
Well, that's astounding. But I mean, what is the state of California's attitude about all this?
Well, I think that the state of California has passed comprehensive fracking regulations for this onshore fracking. Offshore right now, we have the Coastal Commission is actually, after these revelations came out, the California Coastal Commission, launched its own investigation to find out if they should have been notified under their own federal agreements, the federal government, about this fracking. They weren't, and they were surprised to hear about it. I think that, there was, after this story came out, several California lawmakers sent letters to the Department of the Interior demanding an internal investigation from the Interior Department.
Yeah.
Ocean fracking. I mean, there was an uproar in California over this. People were packing meetings.
Yeah, because people are very, history like everything recedes very fast, and people don't remember things. But during the time of the BP oil spill, it was revealed that the Interior Department, especially Bureau of Land, whatever it was, Bureau of Resources or something that was before they created these new agencies, was rotten to the core. I mean, their own regulations were being violated. They were having parties with lobbyists and members of the corporations. So, maybe we have reason to suspect that something funny was going on with these regulators.
Sure, and after the BP oil spill, if you read my latest story on truthout.org, after the BP oil spill, these categorical exclusions, which are an exemption that basically instead of looking at oil drilling activity, a proposed activity, and then having an environmental review of that activity to study the potential impacts of that oil drilling proposal, they use a categorical exclusion to exempt that study and say we don't have to do that environmental study. That's what they did, and that's what they did with this ocean fracking. Now, after the BP oil spill, it was revealed that federal regulators were using these kind of NEPA, these kind of exemptions, these categorical exclusions all the time, and everyone was really upset about it because they were actually allowing a lot of this dangerous deep water drilling that led to the BP oil spill.
Yeah,
since the oil spill, they've been actually having a review of their policy in regard to categorical exclusions, but that didn't prevent them from permitting fracking in the ocean in California.
Well, yeah, I remember they were having parties with these people. There were drugs involved. There was money involved. I mean, this is a good reason to suspect all this, but who knows? Another thing about this is, and you can talk a little bit about it, is that this fracking is taking place 1,500 feet from a seismic fault, right?
Right. One of the 4 operations that was approved this year by BSEE, by the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. That well, it's an existing well that they're going to be stimulating with hydraulic fracturing. That well is 1,500 feet away from a seismic fault. Now, that well's been there. It's been drilled before. And the regulators did a geohazard review. I have a copy of it and said that they're not worried about it. It should be okay. I actually took that geohazard review and I gave it to the United States Geological Survey, and I said, what do you think about this? Do you think this is safe to have pressurized water and chemicals breaking up rock 1,500 feet away from an active seismic fault? And they told me that the geohazard review does not have enough information on it to draw a conclusion.
Amazing.
And I haven't been able to get a geologist to comment on it otherwise because it's so controversial. So the regulators say that it's nothing to be worried about. The geologists say that there's not enough information in their own study of it to know. But yeah, 1,500 feet away from a seismic fault.
Well, I mean, there is increasing evidence. In fact, it's rapidly increasing evidence from various important and extraordinarily reputable authorities that fracking on land may actually be causing earthquakes. Well,
what's happened in the past is that the wastewater injection from fracking has actually caused earthquakes. It caused earthquakes in Oklahoma and also in Ohio. Now, this is not fracking itself. This is billions of gallons of wastewater that's produced by fracking. They re-inject that back into the earth. Now, in the case of Youngstown, Ohio, some of this fracking fluid that was injected back into earth for waste disposal, that actually lubricated a seismic fault, a small seismic fault, and caused a series of about over a dozen earthquakes over the course of a year in Ohio. So, yes, fracking wastewater injection has actually caused earthquakes. Fracking itself causes micro-earthquakes in the ground. That's kind of what it is, breaking up this rock. So, yeah, it hasn't been linked to seismic activity. Absolutely. It's very minor seismic activity. But when you get these really big fault lines like we see out west, that's when you start to get concerned.
Well, also, as you mentioned in your article, there was a tremendous disaster, which I'm sure nobody remembers anymore, but maybe you can remember it for us, in 1969 off the coast of Santa Barbara, right?
Sure, and that's, why oil drilling is still very controversial in the Santa Barbara Channel. There's also a marine wildlife preserve there. In 1969, there was a disastrous oil spill in the Santa Barbara Channel. Americans watched in horror as the beaches were covered in oil. They saw birds, wildlife covered in oil on the beach. It was these images that helped spark actually the modern environmental movement to establish laws like the National Environmental Protection Act, which now environmental groups say the federal government is violating these laws by allowing this fracking without an environmental review. But yeah, this oil spill in the Santa Barbara Channel is kind of what got a lot of people to be concerned about the environment and realize the change had to be happened. And only a few years later, you start to see things like the EPA being created.
Right.
So it's a very, it has a legacy here. Absolutely.
So if people want to get the most up-to-date information about this, what's going on, where exactly would they go online to get this information?
Well, you can't go to the government websites right now because the limited amount of information they do post about oil and gas drilling in our oceans is actually, those websites are down due to the shutdown. So you can check truthout.org. We have our Gas Rush landing page where you can see all of our comprehensive coverage on fracking. And you can also check on all of our stories are linked back to themselves. We've had 4 stories now on fracking in the ocean. They're all the links are included.
Okay, so that's people should go to Truthout, TRUTHOUT, truthout.org, and it's a good place to sign up for updates all the time. Truthout.org. All right, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. The public. So you can't go online to any government agency to check what's going on, to find out how they're polluting the water or polluting the earth or causing earthquakes. You can't find out about that because of a government shutdown, because these gigantic babies, these little tyrannical lunatics in the Republican Party this time, are blackmailing the entire American government and the American people by shutting everything down. The EPA people are furloughed, so they won't be checking into it. So you hear a lot of people like on Fox News, or you hear in interviews with these Tea Party types, with these actually sheer lunatics and extremely psychopathic, insensitive type of people who are called congressmen or 1 or 2 senators, mostly congressmen, who are shaming their own party. What there is to be ashamed about left. Is there anything left that isn't shameful about a major political party, especially the Republican Party? But they are shaming what's left of anything that might even vaguely decent in their own party. They're being yelled at by people in their own party. We don't even know the half of it, what goes on there. It's like warfare going on there. And the only thing that, if you still believe in the two-party system here, and one party should triumph over the other one, and we'll all be living in heaven, sipping honey or whatever, is that if these people like Ted Cruz and other people, especially people in the House of Representatives, Gohmert and all these other lunatics, if they keep acting the way they're acting, and they keep being crazy all the time, straight up until the next election, they'll wind up losing the House and losing more seats in the Senate. So that's okay if they want to keep acting that way. The trouble is that we're all paying for it. Hundreds of thousands of government workers are furloughed. They do not have their paychecks, can't pay their bills. Comes tomorrow, I forget if it's either tonight at midnight or tomorrow at the end of the day at midnight, the government doesn't have a rise in a debt ceiling. And then the Treasury Department says that they only have a week or 2 weeks money left to pay out interest on our debt, or that we could borrow more debt to pay on an ongoing basis the bills of the United States. Now, it's bad enough that the government of the United States is $14 trillion in debt and needs to have it raised to $15 trillion or whatever it is, to borrow money from the Chinese and the Saudis to pay out our bills. One of the reasons is because we don't tax corporations, we don't tax the rich enough, and because we have trillion-dollar wars which go no place and have no reason to be existing at all, and gigantic weapons programs. It's pretty easy when you look at it to see where the money is going and why we are broke. George Bush is really the one that did this. And I'm not just picking on him because he's a Republican, but he clearly is the one that did this. He lowered, he and the Republican Party lowered taxes to a record-breaking low for corporations and for the rich. They don't collect taxes from corporations or from the rich either, with all the loopholes. And then they engage in 2 gigantic wars, which have cost over $1 trillion. Well, of course we're broke on an ongoing basis. Anyhow, so we have to keep borrowing this fake money, this computer money, whatever it is, from overseas, and borrowing money, on the treasury bonds and on the national debt. If we're not allowed to do it, apparently, in this fake, bizarre system that exists now, basically the entire world will experience a gigantic depression. Billions of people will suffer even worse than they're suffering now, all because of a few dozen people in the House of Representatives in one party that's blackmailing the American government and the American people. It's really quite extraordinary. I've never really seen anything like it in all the time that I've been watching this. All right, we're going to take a break now. When we come back, we'll take your calls on these issues. 866-997-4748. Give us a call, and we'll put you right on after we come back from the break. Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Progress 127. Remember, you hear people giving interviews, these right-wingers or Tea Parties or Republicans, whatever. They're giving interviews saying that there's really no harm involved here. They don't see any damage. They don't see any problem with all these people on furlough, government agencies 70, 80, 90% down and not working. Of course, they don't see anything. First of all, they don't see anything. They're deaf, dumb, and blind morally and intellectually. And secondly, they don't see anything because they make a lot of money and they are in Washington, or else they have millions of dollars, or they have friends who have millions of dollars, and they don't suffer from this at all. And also they don't see anything because they can't admit that they might see anything, because that would make them look even more foolish than they already are. But this is it's already having an effect. It's already, before the borrowing limit the debt ceiling problem is actually upon us tomorrow, it's already had an effect. There are tens of millions of people, for instance, in this country, school teachers, people, truck drivers, whoever. There's tens of millions of people who have regular jobs, regular American citizens that have pensions either through, unions or state pensions or, individual pension plans of various sorts. And a lot of this stuff is invested in American, securities. That is to say, United States government securities, treasury bonds. If, in fact, the fear already for the last week or two, the fear that the United States government may not be able to pay its interest on treasury bonds, or to borrow money to pay interest on treasury bonds, which apparently the world uses as a kind of a gold standard, as odd as that is, has already caused the value, it's already caused tens of billions of dollars in lost money in value in people's pension plans that are invested in U.S. Treasury bonds, which many are. So it's already had that effect. Let's say you're a clerk who works for the Social Security Administration, and you've been furloughed, and you make $44,000 a year as a 15 clerk in the Social Security Administration. You've been doing it for 12 years. Let's say you're making $51,000 or $48,000, and you've been working it for 8 years. So you're furloughed. You're not getting paid. Okay, so you barely have enough money to pay for your rent or for your mortgage if you have one, or, gas for your car if you have to drive into work, deductibles, drugs that you may need, if you have a kid or a husband or a wife or a parent or a mother or father that's got some medical care that you have to pay for. You got to buy clothes. School has just basically started. You have school supplies. You have to buy food, which is more expensive all the time. Everything's more expensive. You're making hardly any money. And you're furloughed, right? You don't have money to pay your basic bills. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to be using their credit cards. They'll have interest to pay on credit card debt. All of this is happening. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, a majority of the people at the Center for Disease Control have been furloughed. They're not on the job. They're not working now. This is the place that helps monitor flu epidemics, which are starting or beginning to start soon throughout the country. It helps analyze and monitor them, and it helps to address flu epidemics. It helps when an epidemic breaks out. They're not on the job. The FDA, who inspects food and drugs imported from other places, they're not on the job. People will start to die now. People will die. People will have extreme hospitalizations and suffer because of this furlough that's happening right now because of the government shutdown. If we allow these terrorists, these blackmailers, to get away with this stuff, and we don't, raise the debt limit, the borrowing limit, then our economy will be wrecked to the point where these people's constituents, these actual infants, these giant thumb-sucking infants who are blackmailing the government, their own constituents will suffer abominably, even worse than they're suffering now. Will they know it? I don't know. If they keep watching Fox News, they won't ever know it, because the people on the Fox News, they don't see anything wrong either. The people with the hair gel and the suntans who make $500,000 or $2 million a year to say nitwit things out in the camera that people watch and actually vote based on it? You know, between the ignorance and the opportunism and the narcissism and the power hungriness and the arrogance of these people and the strange intellectually deficient and morally deficient bubble they live in, there's already tremendous suffering going on. Tremendous suffering. And they say they don't see anybody suffering particularly from it. Well, they're anywhere from insensitive to actually criminal. All right, who do we have?
David from North Carolina.
David from North Carolina, you're on.
How are you doing this evening?
Okay.
Good. What I wanted to suggest or see what you thought about it was the other side of things. Where you're against the government giving away money, right? Because of all the loopholes and all the tax incentives.
Well, I don't know what you mean by giving away money. You have to be much more specific than giving away money.
Okay. As far as if a business makes X amount of money, the government gives them X amount of subsidies back for whatever R&D they do or whatever.
Well, I mean, you'd have to take it case by case. But for instance, if you're a gigantic farming corporation, or if you're a huge international banking corporation, or if you're, let's say, an oil and gas company that makes $20 billion in profit a year, you don't need any subsidies from the people of the United States. No.
Right. Absolutely. So why, if I don't have to, or if I should not have to subsidize them, why should I have to subsidize somebody's health care? Or why not just go to a flat tax where everybody pays the same thing? And then there's no more subsidies. There's no more any of that.
So what is your basic attitude towards other people? If people are in trouble, would you help them out?
And I do. I work. I pay my taxes. I'm actually in healthcare. I'm a nurse.
Uh-huh.
So I am in healthcare.
So you're in healthcare. So you run across people who actually are suffering or miserable or in pain of one sort. Yeah, and you help them.
You're right, because even though me and your views are completely different, but I also have the ability to, when I walk through their door or when I walk into work in the morning, that stays at the door. You know what I mean? I understand that that's an absolute necessity.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also seen cases where you talk about them dropping people's Medicare, where somebody's 28 years old and has never paid into Medicare or Social Security, and they run through $4 or $5 million in Medicare and Medicaid.
If they're in desperate condition and they need it. I mean, there's people who game the system all the time. I mean, every month there's some group of people who's indicted, or doctors or a hospital for cheating Medicare. I mean, that's always going to happen. You have to keep the pressure on those people. You got to lock them up for a long time, make examples out of them. But you have to assume, or you have to hope, that most people are not going to lie. In other words, if somebody comes down with cancer, what do? Just let them die if they're 29 years old?
You treat them the best you can, but to throw $4 million of taxpayer money at a case that's never going to get any better. The problem is, and I see this, and I think that the left looks at stuff too emotionally, while at the same time the right looks at stuff without enough, if that makes sense.
No, I hear what you're saying.
If we approached, everything that we're doing in the government more of a business attitude instead of a hearts and minds attitude.
Well, wait. A business attitude. You mean, well, that's one of the problems with the entire country, is that there's too much business attitude. That is to say, everything is based on a profit. That's bad.
Well, the government has to be able to make money to stay functioning.
No, the government doesn't have to make money. It just has to take in enough money to pay its bills. The government's not making money. It's not a profit-making organization in the United States.
No, it would help if we could make about 15 trillion to pay off our debt, though.
That's true, to pay off the debt, but we're not supposed to make a profit in the United States.
No,
I mean, after all.
You're right. Wrong word. But what if we just did away with the tax system? Everybody pays the same amount, whether you make 10 grand or 10 million, you pay the same percentage. All the corporations and everything like that, everybody pays this percentage, and they could pay off and do it based on this is what it would take to pay off the national debt in 50 years, and then also stop giving away so much money and so much of our taxpayer money that goes to stuff that is not in the Constitution for the government to do.
Like setting up a gigantic embassy in Baghdad, which is bigger than half of the states in the United States, for no good reason? Something like that, you mean?
Yeah, and I'm also, not only am I a nurse, I am a Iraq War veteran. I was combat infantry, and that's what patching up people is what got me to love healthcare.
Wow.
I've patched up burns and bullet holes of my best friends.
So what about veterans benefits?
Absolutely, because they earned it as part of a contract. Because when I signed the contract, like some people, one person called the GI Bill an entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
And that, because of what the entitlements are connotated with, infuriated me.
I'm sorry, what? Say that again? Are you still there? We're having trouble with your signal.
I'm here.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with your. Are you on the road? Because your signal's going in and out.
Yeah, I'm back in a good zone.
Oh, that's okay. So this is it always comes down to a kind of philosophy. Wait a minute, hold it.
Okay.
I think it all comes down, these kinds of conversations, it often comes down to me, anyhow, to a philosophy of life. People should have a sense of responsibility towards other people, which means, and I don't mean that in just like, here's the left-wing knee-jerk way, responsibility to take care of everybody. The responsibility to other people should be that you don't drain their resources either unnecessarily. I think we're all in the same boat, almost literally, in a shark-filled ocean. Life is hard, right? We're all in the same boat. We should all row as hard as we can. If somebody, by accident or bad luck, or maybe because the deck was stacked against them in some way, racism or who knows what, if they temporarily can't row, then they got to be helped out. Now, if somebody says, you know what, I'm not in the mood to row, I think I'd rather just sit back and sort of daydream, then you don't help them out.
Well, that's also why God calls on us. I am, even though I was combat infantryman, I'm a devout Christian, and I give, on top of my taxes, I give at least 20% a month to my church.
That's a lot.
Which part of it goes to ministry, but our church also does a lot in the community. Especially coming up for the holidays, I'll probably give more.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could get back to, the Leave It to Beaver kind of attitude where everybody helps everybody out. It's not the government swooping in to help the family next door who lost their job and doesn't have food.
But a lot of times there's a lot of people who live in communities for one reason or another, and there are lots of complicated reasons for this, that don't have the ability to be helped out by people in that community. Like if you live in a very big city, and most people in this country tend to live in cities these days rather than rural communities.
Right.
In a big city, you can get lost. There aren't that many social service organizations and churches and synagogues or whatever in big cities that can actually help people that much sometimes. Sometimes people...
need more of them.
Well, I would prefer... See, I don't like to have... then we're really in different sides of things. I have a very bad attitude about formalized religion. So here's where you and I really walk down...
Very fortunate that I have it. I've seen because, and talking about communities, our church sponsors it was a former mining town in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And every other month we take supplies to that town. People throw out, get rid of your dishwasher or clothes washer. And my church, we don't take and sell it or trade it in or put it on the street. We take it to them if it works, of course. We don't take them stuff that doesn't work. And, even if you don't believe in formalized religion, I think almost every religion or every theology almost every theology teaches you help the person beside of you. You don't,
But that's exactly,
to do it.
No, I understand, but that's exactly the point. You take that teaching, for instance, why do you pay taxes? Is it only because you're compelled to do it? Or why would you pay why do you pay taxes? Is there a reason why you think you should pay taxes?
Absolutely, to fund the government for the necessary operations to keep our government going and keep our country safe, and as far as infrastructure as well.
So, but when it comes to paying, what about Medicare and Social Security? What do you think about those two things?
Medicare and Social Security, because me and you both, we see in our paycheck every month, Medicare and Social Security, if it is being paid to individuals who paid into it, then I think it's appropriate. But for instance, like the person I told you about that sucked up $3.5 million of Medicare at 28 years old who never paid a dime into it, I honestly don't think that's proper. I think if you paid into it, then that's something that goes back to almost like I said with my GI Bill that I got that put me through nursing school. It was part of a contract.
So, but what about? Let's say you're a 30. Here, because I have to move on and take other calls. But here's the last here's the last question I'll ask you. Let's say you're a person that lives in, I don't know, like a small city in Iowa. You know, there's like 50,000 people in a small city in Iowa, and you were brought up, you know, to be a decent person. You're responsible to other people. Let's say you belong to a church. You are a delivery person for a local florist. Okay, you know, you deliver stuff in a van, and you make $41,000 a year, which you and I know very well is barely getting along in this day and age.
Yeah.
Okay, after taxes, good luck.
Yeah,
all right. So you're driving along, and somebody who's drunk or somebody who is exceeding the speed limit by 3 times goes through a light, hits your van, and cripples you, and you need expensive care for the rest of your life, but you don't belong to a church, right? And you don't belong, let's say you're just sort of like somebody who just moved there like 2 years ago. You don't know anybody.
Right.
Maybe you don't belong to a church. Who is supposed to help you?
Then the person who was driving drunk or your insurance. Well, first off, you should take them to the cleaners and take every dime they have.
Mm-hmm.
And with a good legal team, because if you're driving drunk,
you see what I'm driving at. I mean, if you don't have that private kind of profit-making insurance company, my attitude is that there shouldn't be any that nobody should really be making a profit almost off of anything. And we should all be in this together to help each other. Maybe there's overpopulation. That's a problem. But I think we should all be, I mean, in your church, you just, you contribute to other people's welfare because they need it, and you hope they don't take advantage of it, and everybody does right by everybody else. I'd just like to see that expanded to include a whole society. If somebody leeches off the society, then you don't help them, you know.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Well, that's the problem. There's so many people now leeching. You know, there's, how much bigger would our government have to be to catch them all?
You know, to me, the biggest leeches are the corporations and the hedge funds and the loophole guys.
And the government.
Yeah, and well, yeah. Anyhow, all right, listen, I got to move on.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Okay, who do we have?
We have Michelle from Michigan.
Michelle from Michigan, you're on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yep.
My question, well, like most people, I find it completely obscene that Congress is still getting paid during this time. I realize it's probably not even a rounding error in terms of money, but what can some of us do to try to change that apart from writing our senators and congressmen?
Oh, well, I really wouldn't know aside from breaking into their office and taking their wallets. I have no idea what you do about it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the people that I've talked to are just outraged, friends and so forth, and the fact that they're still getting paid when, you know, we have friends who are not getting paid.
Right.
It's just obscene, and it's beyond the pale. But my question to you is, apart from the fact that I'm obviously I'm not real happy with either party at this point, and I do think that they're sort of two faces of the same coin. They both have the same objective, which is to keep their seat of power, their circle of influence, their own jobs, if you will. And they're both funded by the same people, by corporate America. So what do we really do to change the system? Based on my, little research, and I'm not in politics, I'm not in marketing. This is not what I do every day, but, I'm concerned and I read and research. And I guess it seems like if we had campaign finance laws, if we had term limits, and if we could somehow keep the door to the lobbyists out, what do you see in terms of sort of stepping back, real big picture? How do we really try to change Washington?
I see, and I've mentioned this before, after all these years and all the people I've talked to and all the thinking I've done about it and all the books I've read and all the articles, it seems to me there's 3 major ways. One is I think that people need to run people in primaries. People have to get together in local communities and run really genuine left-wing liberal candidates, not regular Democrats. We have to run people who are really representative of people's needs in primaries against Democrats who are part of the status quo, who are the usual suspects of a corporate Democratic Party. We've got to run people in primaries against them the way the Tea Party ran people against regular Republicans, right? So that's one thing. Second thing is, I think what we have to do is we have to reinstitute or reawaken people to the idea of massive strikes and civil disobedience in this country to make our point. Because we're just too polite, and people do not get out in the streets. People do not block doorways. People do not stand, like, for instance, there should be hundreds of thousands of people right now standing in the hallways and outside the buildings of Congress, screaming at these people, calling them names, telling them they have no right to get paid, telling them that they should stop acting this way. And that's what I think. There should be massive civil disobedience, very left-wing candidates in primaries. And I think the third thing is that we should try to push for laws that anybody that there should be no lobbyists within 100 miles of any state capital or the federal government's capital.
Sure.
No lobbyists within 100 miles. If anybody takes anybody to lunch, if they give them extra money, if they pay for a plane flight, they should be sent to jail without parole for 20 years.
Yeah, I don't disagree
or they should have all their clothes taken off and put in a cage in Times Square for 2 years.
Well, that's not a bad idea either.
So that's my attitude.
No, I don't disagree. It's just incredible. I guess my concern is that if the Democrats, or some far left side starts to sort of mimic what the crazy right has done, then are we at an impasse?
But we're talking about two different kinds of people here. We're talking about the people on the Tea Party and the right wing are, if they're not actually deluded and somewhat stupid, like Louis Gohmert and all these people, or Ted Cruz, who's actually out of his mind, right? Certifiable almost. Yeah. If you don't have people like that, or if they're not actually the actual puppets of people like the Koch brothers who pay for their elections, like Scott Walker in Wisconsin. Sure. So you got that type of people on that side. They're either crazy or stupid or bigoted, or they're being bought and sold by rich people. My attitude is that if somebody like me, for instance, and my kinds of attitude, like single payer, like 80% income tax for people make over $1 million. I mean, serious left-wing attitudes about things. If somebody like me was running as a candidate, I don't think that I'm the equivalent of a hired, dim-witted, bigoted lunatic on the other side. So I don't see an equivalent there.
Okay, so why don't you run?
I like, because I like to stay home with my wife, and we watch Friday Night Lights. We have nice dinners. I'm an old guy. Young people need to take over. But when I was in my 20s and 30s, I was doing all the things I'm talking about. I was campaigning for people who were far on the left, who could hardly be in the Democratic Party. I was out on the street getting myself beat up because I didn't believe in the way the government was acting. I didn't like the wars. I didn't like the way the civil rights were not being prosecuted and people couldn't vote. I was doing things in behalf of the poor and paying for it by getting thumped by the cops all the time. And also, I was calling people out and shaming them, standing in doorways and being dragged out of them. I mean, I think I was doing that. But you know what? I think that there are new generations for a particular reason. New people need to do these things.
It just seems like there's so much apathy, and that people are disinterested unless they finally think that, this might affect me. And it's kind of what, Thomas Jefferson, one of his concerns about the great unwashed, big stupid out there, in terms of, I don't mean to call Americans stupid, but I mean, they seem just completely disinterested.
It's not, I don't, it's obviously, stupid isn't the right word. I think basically ignorance is the right word. And it's deliberate ignorance. I mean, it's deliberate ignorance. The other day in San Francisco, there was a news report from San Francisco on a commuter train that was about 3/4 filled on a commuter train. A man, and they caught this on the camera later on the surveillance camera that was in this car somehow, right? A man pulled out a large automatic pistol and pointed it at another guy, and he kept pulling it out over and over again out of his clothes and pointing it at a guy. And finally, he shot the guy and killed him. And they have surveillance.
Walked away.
Huh?
He walked away, and everyone was too consumed with their cell phones.
That's exactly what was happening. The whole time that he kept pulling this gun out, which was over a period of minutes. Nobody said a word. Nobody dialed 911. Nobody texted 911. Nobody screamed. Nobody said anything. Nobody went to look for a conductor, because every last one of them was staring at a device.
Sure. And in the meantime, in so many states, you can just carry openly.
Well, so there you have it. Yeah, on one side you have left, right, middle, you have old and young. Everybody is staring at some device and moving their head around, and their eyes are closed, or they're playing a video game. Meanwhile, other people are coming around and eating us like wolves.
Right.
And they're sitting there. It's almost symbolically, it's a situation where somebody is sitting there and playing a video game while somebody's actually eating their other arm. You know what I mean?
Right.
And they don't even know it anymore because, and the other reason they don't know it is because half the country is taking prescription drugs and they're numb anyhow. So I don't know. The answer to this is there's got to be some great reawakening. And a lot of people say that like hitting bottom for a drug addict or a drunk, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's got to get a lot worse.
I think and I've said this before. I think things are going to have to get a lot worse in this country. I hate to say it, and I don't want to see it because I live here, my wife lives here, my kids live here. I think things are going to have to get a lot worse. People are going to have to be dying and starving and living in the streets and suffocating from heat and dying from cold in the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands. And finally, people will turn on the government and say, do the right thing. And,
right, and the question is, how will they turn on the government? It's like any major corporation that has real systemic need for change. They really have to hit rock bottom before they realize that they're going to close their doors and turn out the lights. Before any real change happens.
Well, I mean, that's the way. It's the way of the world, and it's the way of individuals too. You know, in your own life, same's happened in my life. Until I got really bad, I never got better.
Yeah, you get really bad, then you try to get good.
Or you give up, or sometimes you can go too far. There's this movie called I forget what it's called. I think it's called Into the Woods Into the Wild, which is based on a book and about a kid who really didn't know how to survive in the wild. Went up to Alaska because he thought it was romantic or interesting. He wanted to do this, but he didn't know how to survive. He was a city kid, right? So he goes up to this place. He went too far into the wild, and he couldn't get out, and he died. You know what I mean? People will go down and they'll hit bottom, but sometimes when you hit bottom, you don't have the strength to get back up. I don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see that happen. I say that anybody who's in the Democratic Party needs to take a good hard look at it, step outside it, and back up candidates in primaries that are sort of the left-wing equivalent of the Tea Party, because they'll be more decent, more concerned about people, and more intelligent.
Well, that's interesting because I never really thought about it that way. And with everything that's happened, my husband and I really consider ourselves more independent because it's hard to get behind either party at this point. No,
I agree. Listen, I'm at the end of the hour and I got to stop. So I'll be back next week. We've got some interesting guests. And thanks for calling.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. That's it for this week. I know you want to hear more hours more of this, but I can't do it. I have to go home and lie down. I'm tired from doing all this. And my engineer's tired. She's lying down right now. Not even supposed to. She's lying right down on the floor. What am I supposed to do? I got to go for her sake. All right. That's it for this. You want to throw into, you want to push a button and put some music on? Because I can't even talk anymore. That's it.